Test. When the speaker's talking, we want the screen to show the speaker.
Sorry, say that again.
When the speaker starts, we want the screen to show the speaker as they do their intro. As soon as they're done with their intro and switch to their slides, then we just need you to put that on the slides, and it can stay there until they're done and they do their closing. And then we just need to move it back so we get the speaker. It's just so the audience can see who the speaker is at the front and the end. And then they'll just look at the slides. So we don't distract the audience, I've got this little thing that covers up the screen, but you can, if you lift it up when you turn, you'll be able to see. And then the audience won't get distracted by the screen color. That's it. It's not a hard job, but it's an important job.
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you.
No worries. When's it stopping?
After we moved. You know, I think we were there about half an hour after. This is funny, just looking up going, oh, where is everyone? Still kind of comical that Dave Watt might not be out on the grab leg. That's hilarious. That's hilarious. Just one bill $89.
I made you. I was thinking later. That's stealing like $1.
The thing was, every time something went down on my jumper, I was actually picking it up. I'm glad I didn't just go. Morning, sir. Have us go back to our same chairs.
Good morning, everybody. We're ready to get started for the day. Hope you all had a great night last night. Our first presenter is Victoria Young, and she's going to talk about diagnostic imaging at the point of care as a possible role for community paramedics. Vicki, thank you very much.
We'll have to get him probably tell everyone things. What's getting? I think he'd be fine.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for waking up and coming. I'm really happy to be here. Today I'm going to talk about diagnostic imaging at the point of care, as it's a possible role for community paramedics. Just a little bit about myself. I'm from the University Health Network, the Toronto Rehab Institute in Toronto. And for those of you not too familiar with Ontario, Ontario is has a population of about 13 point, a little under 14.5 million people, and I've been collaborating with the York Region Paramedic Services, which is a little, which is in the southern part of Ontario, and it's this yellow area in Ontario, and this orange area below is Toronto, so it's outside of the Toronto area. So I just wanted to go over some of the current events that have been happening in Toronto over the last year. So we've been dealing with offload delays, which might be familiar to you as well. Hallway medicine. There's a concern about healthcare associated infections. Also, there's studies have shown that increasing wait times can lead to short-term mortality. We have long wait times to get into long-term care, as well as we have a shortage of physicians. And the study shows that Canadian seniors institutional, national, and international level. So some of the healthcare system needs, according to the literature, is our high-cost hospital users in Canada tend to be those that are admitted for chronic disease, infection, acute events, and palliative care. And according to the Canadian Academy of Health Sciences, the areas which the healthcare system needs improvement the most are more comprehensive care, such as chronic care management, care of the elderly, especially in the home, long-term care, and end of life, effective health promotion, mental health care, and addiction, and also better access to care, especially for marginalized and vulnerable populations. And this especially is true for after-hours care. A paper by Evans in the USA identified that they did a study over 6 years, and more than 1 in 6 older adults required repeat emergency medical system transport over 30 days, and this tended to increase from 30 to 90 days. So this suggests that this is very costly to repeatedly transport patients to the hospital, and it suggests that patients may not be receiving adequate medical care to meet their needs. If we look specifically at the older adult patients, some of the top reasons for visiting the emergency department include pneumonia and fall-related injuries. So myself, I'm a clinical engineer, so my specialty is medical equipment, and I'm focusing on aging. And then I met some people at the York Region Community Paramedic group, and I learned all about community paramedicine. And they were interested in collaborating, and particularly they were interested in X-ray. And anyways, the community paramedicine group in York Region is providing community support in a number of ways. They were involved in a research study called Expanding Paramedicine in the Community, called EPIC. And this program still continues, even though the research study has finished. And this looked at collaborating with family health teams for individuals with chronic heart failure, COPD, and diabetes mellitus. And there is a current program called the Hospital at Home. One of the physicians got research funding to identify repeat users of the emergency department, and they identified these individuals and asked if they would be interested in a hospital at home program where a community paramedic teams up with a nurse practitioner as well as a physician and does visits to the home to try to reduce the number of emergency room transplants. And there's also community paramedics in the social housing area and emergency housing. So most of this focuses on chronic disease management, health promotion, and community service navigator. The closest that comes kind of with primary care is the hospital at home. So one of the questions was, if there's a call to 911, is there a way that paramedics can also provide some service? So Walter Tavares is a paramedic researcher, and they did a study looking at 3,000 patients from 3 different hospitals in the York region. So the patients called 911 and they were brought to hospital emergency. So in Canada currently, the regulations require that all patients be brought to the hospital. There's no diversion to family health teams or anything like that. If they want to stay at home, they have to sign a form saying that they refuse transport. So he looked at CTAS, the Canadian Triage Acuity Scale, is called CTAS, and he looked at the lower acuity, 4 and 5, and he saw that 82.2% of them were not admitted. And this is the same true if you look for the older adults. And this corresponds to other research literature that also found that the majority of patients that are sent to the emergency department are not admitted. So in this study, he looked at 3,000 patients, and he looked specifically at those that were discharged from the hospital, and he broke those down into the individuals that had no intervention or diagnostic, those who had a diagnostic such as a lab test or X-ray, those who had an intervention, such as medication, and those who had both diagnostic interventions. And they did different types of modeling, and he identified, so the key thing here is that X-ray kept coming up in their study. And so this kind of led them to question, led to the research question, should radiography be included in the scope of practice for paramedics? They were not saying that they have to do it, but they were just curious. It just kept coming up, and they were wondering, is there anything that they can do in this area? So that's how the collaboration began. So the hypothesis is that performing radiography in urgent situations out of hospital at the point of care will better aid in assessing a patient's medical condition and help guide decision-making in selecting the most appropriate care approach. So just to give you a sense of what a portable X-ray would look like, on the top we have a in-hospital room X-ray machine, stationary machine, and on the bottom is a mobile X-ray that they use inside a facility. So the bottom line is about upwards of 900 to 1,000 pounds. A portable X-ray though is something like the Senecal Dragon, and that's about 100, a little bit over 100 pounds. And now they're going from film to direct digital imaging, even for the portable machines. And the Min X-ray is one that has also been used in the field. So some of the questions that have been emerging in the EMS literature is, are all of these technologies kind of helping or are they hindering? And there's a question about how do we avoid over-testing or under-testing patients. There's questions about who can perform the test, what can be tested, when to test, where to test, how fast can this test be done, and if you get a diagnostic result, are you going to transport or you're not going to transport? So lots of questions in terms of this one question about radiography. So the way we approached it was to use the Medical Research Council guidance for complex interventions, which is kind of broken down into 3 steps: identifying the evidence base, developing a theory, and modeling the process or outcome. So the first step is where I am at with the research, looking at the demand. Is there a need? Is this even feasible idea? So the way I approach this in the literature is to look at stakeholder interviews and focus groups, which is more qualitative research. And then I'm looking at some of the quantitative research, so examining the 911 calls and hospital data, specifically looking at age, what type of images were taken, what is their acuity level. And I also am looking at some of the published literature and the lay literature, and looking what other EMS, emergency medical service providers are doing across the country. So all of this combined hopefully will give us some evidence to answer that question. So I'll talk a little bit about the environmental scan, just briefly. So currently in Canada, there are private providers of portable X-ray that will take an X-ray machine to the home. This is similar to America, but it's not widespread across the country. Some areas have it, some areas don't. But the thing about the portable X-ray is it's only 9 to 5, and it's not for urgent situations. Literature in the research has looked at portable units being used in long-term care home. This is a study from the Netherlands that have looked at that. But I couldn't really find any studies looking at radiography and paramedics for Canada in any case. In Alberta, we do have a CT unit on ambulance, and this is one unit in Canada, and this is a research study. Also, in Renfrew, in Ottawa, they're trying out the use of portable ultrasound. But currently there's, for the portable ultrasound project, there's no research study associated with it, but there is a research study associated with the stroke unit. In terms of X-rays, when you take an image, it's mostly a radiation technologist that takes an image. And in Canada, according to the HARP Act is what they call it, sometimes nurses can take images and criminologist is a regulated profession. So it's typically a 4-year university program. So the question is there any kind of role for the paramedic within this realm? So looking at the qualitative literature, I'll talk a little bit about some of our findings. In my research study, I interviewed 42 different stakeholders, and that's across the healthcare continuum. So I talked to different personal support workers, care providers that are based in the home, people that are working in the government, and different healthcare facilities. So I'll talk about maybe, I decided I'd break it down into 3 people. So there's Joe, Martha, and Alina. Joe lives in a home in a big urban city. Martha lives in a long-term care home in a small city, and Alina lives in a community housing in the suburbs. They're all in their 80s. And Joe lives with his wife, who's also 80 years old. Martha's family lives in the same city, and Alina lives alone. She has no family close by. Joe has access to multiple specialists that come in and out of the home, and he also gets home care provided 2 times a week. Martha doesn't speak English too well. Her first language is Greek. And Alina, but she's in a long-term care home. Alina doesn't have any home care support. She's on a long-term care wait list, and she also doesn't have a family physician. So Martha and Alina both get around with assistance. Alina uses a walker. Martha uses a wheelchair. Joe is walking. So Joe has mild dementia and kidney disease. Martha has diabetes and asthma. Alina has arthritis and urinary incontinence. So the situation is that Joe fell down and he broke his hip. He went to the hospital and he's come back, but he's no longer mobile. He may have a bit of delirium, and recently he started having a fever. Martha fell out of bed at night. She experiences pain in her leg. She has a small bleeding cut on her arm. And Alina has an indwelling catheter that's fallen out. It's 11 p.m. in the middle of winter. So it's very cold. So what are the options for Joe, Martha, and Alina in terms of health care in the Canadian system? So in terms of primary care, we have family health teams, we have community health centers, we have walk-in centers, and we have urgent care centers. Up and coming is or for the last few years is health banks. But in terms of Joe, Martha, and Alina, because Joe is not mobile, the community health center probably wouldn't be his best bet. In terms of Alina, because it's 11 p.m., it's after hours, so she doesn't have much access. And in terms of Martha, she's in the long-term care home, but it might be difficult to get a hold of a physician. So in most cases, these 3 people would go to secondary care. So that's the hospital, the emergency room, and special urgent care centers. And also weather plays a big role, especially in the winter time. So in talking with different people, some of the quotes that have come out, this is from an emergency physician who was doing a house call. And he explains that he's come to a house and the wife is in tears, and she's crying, saying, "The hospital forced me to take my husband home. I don't know what to do. I called the family doctor, and they say, have the house doctor come and do a house call." And he says, "Well, what am I supposed to do?" And so he's doing a house call, but he's saying that at 12 o'clock she had a whole support team in the hospital, and at 2 o'clock she's been sent home with her husband. She's 80, he's not mobile, and she doesn't know what to do. And home care might not be coming for 48 hours or 72 hours or longer, depending on how she's in the list and also what she's eligible for. So that's one of the challenges right now in Ontario and across Canada. A quote from a personal support worker, she comments that there's a lot of caregivers going in there both kind of on the Martha personality is that community paramedic has mentioned that a lot of their folks, they save well for retirement, but they outlive their resources. A personal support worker also says it's really hard for them just to get out of the car or down the steps. A doctor can only do so much when they're coming into the home, so they can order tests, and then you're stuck with this problem. Well, how do you get them there? For Elena, so she's in the long-term care home, and frequently, if the long-term care home has access to portable X-ray, they do make requests. And so this is a quote from a radiation technologist who provides portable X-ray. He says that they receive many requisitions, and it says on the requisition to prevent emergency transfer. So the portable X-ray company doesn't do urgent, but we do get a lot of requests. This person also said once the patient comes back from the nursing home, they're ordering another chest X-ray. So they immediately come back from the hospital and they're put in isolation as a precaution until they rule out C. diff, MRSA, and all the other big bugs. And this person is saying that that's routine now for most homes. So they're getting irradiated twice because they've gone to the hospital. So a health administrator has also said 3 benefits of staying out of the hospital for this older age would be not exposing them to more contagion, better use of emergency, and not contributing to the distress and possible further agitation of the elderly person. A geriatrician has mentioned that there would be a huge benefit because emergency can be a challenging place for older adults. If they're waiting for a long time, it's busy and it's noisy, especially for a person with dementia, and they increase the risks of delirium and other problems that can develop, such as skin breakdown if you're waiting for a long time in the home. So in terms of home care, we have home care support. Occasionally there's a house call doctor, but it's not across Canada. Telehealth is something that's emerging. There are healthcare teams, which is also emerging, but it's not everywhere. There's nurse-led outreach teams, which is also emerging, and there's community paramedics, which is emerging. Some of the technologies that people mentioned were electronic health, mobile lab. So mobile lab will come in for a cost of $30, and they'll come to your house, but they're also 9 to 5, and they don't do urgent typically. And there's the independent health facility, which is the mobile X-ray company, and there's telephone care and telemedicine, depending on where you live. There's also a lot of different things going on in terms of reorganization of the healthcare structure. And in Ontario, we have local health integration networks, which are kind of, Ontario is broken up into different regions, and each of those regions is controlled by the different local health integration networks. So looking specifically at the home care team, there's a team of a physician, occupational therapist, a social worker, and a community paramedic at one point, and they had people on their roster and they would visit them, but you had to be over a certain age and you had to be homebound. So she was saying that it would be great to have access to more being diagnostic testing, because they would send people to the emergency, and even a doctor who goes to the home, it's beyond what they can do because they don't have any of the equipment. She talks a bit about when they partnered with a community paramedic who didn't have access to equipment, and she says this was super helpful because then the results and everything was done in time. Labs take a couple of days to get the blood work back and everything, and then upload it to the electronic medical record. So looking at the mobile X-ray company, some of the quotes were they get requisitions that say query fractured hip, query pneumonia, chronic heart failure, question mark. And as a clinician, you would say, well, those are urgent type environments, aren't they? And the radiation technologist also mentioned. So he talked about a story about how they hired, this family hired an ambulance, not to bring them to the hospital, but to bring one of their loved ones one of the barriers for the portable X-ray company is that they can't go up more than 3 steps because it's one person going and for workplace safety issues. Going up more than 3 steps repeatedly would be difficult. So they sometimes go to a home and they ask them if they have more than 3 steps, and they might say yes because the front steps is not more than 3, but when they get inside, the person is up a full flight of steps inside the home. So in this case, they couldn't do the imaging, and they called the paramedics. And a caregiver in this instance, her husband was in a long-term care home, and he fell down and he broke his leg. And she says it's really quite challenging to get him up. And I said, I'm not taking him out. This is crazy. And this is in the middle of winter. And so you get an X-ray to come in here. And so they did this a few times, and she felt that it really made a huge difference to have the portable X-ray machine. And this was just a phlebotomist in the hospital was mentioning that she thought that providing more support for urgent care in the home would be helpful because it would help people heal a little better. They won't suffer the anxiety being in an environment they're not familiar with, and they're in the comfort of their own home. They can use their own bathrooms, they can own bed, because that's one huge factor in the comfort of your home is sleeping in your bed is probably the best medicine. So preliminary results for the qualitative research is that all stakeholders supported medical diagnostics provision at the home. There was talk about a clear need for team communication and access to patient information because even now there's difficulties with electronic patient record. What came out of these interviews was also timing. If we were to provide diagnostic testing in the home, the result would have to come back within a few hours to less than a day at an urgent level. Some emergency physicians talked about there being kind of risks for the clinician in treating the patient outside of the home, but a few of the emergency physicians talked about the risks for the older population in particular outweighing the risk for the clinician. There were different opinions in the interviews that with respect to the acuity level of the target population. So some felt that it was more for the chronic care cases and that all urgent should be sent home, whereas others really felt that the urgent, there was a gap with respect to urgent care. So in terms of the direction for the qualitative work would be to define what urgent means and to identify a way to leverage existing services. Nobody wanted to start kind of a new system, so build on the expertise of what's already in place and to develop a clinical process and a business plan and to assess economic feasibility. So I just wanted to touch base on some of the quantitative work to give you a different aspect on that side. So what I did was I did a secondary analysis on the 3,000 patients on the data from the Caviers et al. Study. And essentially, the question is who is getting an X-ray? And in most cases, it was, so the 3,000 patients are everyone that called 911 and went to the hospital. So it's mostly women, and 57.2%. And those that got an X-ray, it was also mostly women. And of those that were discharged, had an X-ray and were within the acuity level, the lower acuity level 3 to 5, it was also more women. So essentially, there's slightly more women than men getting an X-ray. In terms of the age distribution, it tends to be so for the total records, for the 3,000, it tends to be kind of older people and younger people going to the hospital. So over 80 and under 49. But looking specifically at the patients that had X-rays ordered, it tends to be kind of 65 years and older. So mostly 65 years and older is the point. In terms of the acuity level, so we looked in this case at the paramedic assigned acuity level because there's when the paramedic brings the patient to the hospital, the nurse also assigns acuity level. But in this case, if the paramedic was to provide a diagnosis other diagnostics. So people that come to X-ray hospital might not just do an X-ray. And in this case, some of the people also did a CT and ultrasound. The numbers dropped those, but those who, in this case, did a ultrasound and or CT were mostly those that were 80 years and older. And in terms of the looking at, and then what we decided to do was look at who was getting an X-ray done, but not having an ultrasound, not having a CT, and not having a laboratory test. Because if it's a paramedic going in, they might not have access to lab tests, and they won't have access to CT and ultrasound. So looking at that, it actually flips from older people to being more younger people. And then secondary was the older people over 80. If we look at what type of images are being taken, of all the 3,000 people, of the people that had an X-ray ordered, it was by and large chest. And then if we looked at the X-rays ordered and the people that were discharged within a lower acuity level, it was still chest. But if we only looked at X-ray without ultrasound and CT without lab, so only getting an X-ray and then being discharged, it was still mostly chest, but it's only 21.6%, so it actually dropped down quite a bit. So there was tests being taken across the different areas. So in terms of patient type, the TAVR study looked at kind of why do people go to the hospital, and because there's so many different types of reasons, they use the Canadian clinical coding scale, and we identified 170 of these different codes. So in the TAVR study, looking at everyone that was discharged, it was mostly for the top three was injuries, chest pain, and disease. If we then look at all of the patients, regardless of whether they had X-ray or not, it was the same injuries, chest pain, or abdominal pain as the top three. And then looking at those patients that had X-rays ordered, it was back problems, injuries, and pneumonia. But then taking out only the X-ray without ultrasound, CT, or lab tests, so only getting X-ray as the diagnostic, it was your other injuries, your superficial injuries, and your sprains and strains, which makes sense with the younger population. So, in conclusion, should radiography be included in the scope of practice for paramedics was the question. I'm not sure we specifically answered this right out, but what we know so far is that currently there's some private companies that provide portable X-ray in the community. They also provide some lab and ultrasound, but it's not on an urgent basis. There's a limited access to diagnostic tests to assist with urgent care provision in the community. So there is a need. We've identified some barriers and supports to the provision of urgent community care. And it's mostly younger patients followed by the 80+ patients that visit the hospital emergency for a diagnostic or an X-ray only diagnostic. Older patients also obtain multiple diagnostic tests when visiting the hospital emergency. So if this is something that the paramedic group wishes to provide, they have to look at some of the other tests, specifically lab testing. So back to the title, diagnostic imaging at the point of care, a possible role for community paramedics. How do we move forward with that? So one of the questions then is, where can community paramedics best assist and complement existing services? The next steps according to the framework in developing intervention would be to look at the different possible roles for the paramedic and identify kind of what would be best based on the barriers and supports and logistics, economics, and interactions. So for example, do we kind of go status quo? So far there's no involvement. Do we not, would the paramedics not do anything? Or would they consider a referral service? So if they find someone that needs an X-ray, can they refer them to, say, the private portable X-ray company? Or can they provide physical support for the X-ray company that can't go up how does this affect paramedic training? If they're doing extremities and chest, how much training would be involved? Who should be taking these images if the paramedic was taking? Is it a community paramedic, an advanced care paramedic, or would a traditional paramedic, or say primary paramedic? Or would you kind of have a team-based support? So for the stroke unit, they're working with the radiology technologists on board the stroke unit. Or they could have a special unit, or they could work with private industry. And then there's always, you have to look at the regulations, the liability, and the finances. And is there a motivation to continue in this direction? And can we provide evidence to show that this would be beneficial? So the last step would be to, once you have the paramedic roles, to look at the process in terms of how this could be done. So that's it. There's a lot of people involved in this study. There's some references if you're interested.
Thank you, Becky. We're going to move on to our next presenter, and we're going to take just a second here to switch computers.
All right, thank you very much. My name is Chelsea White. I am from New Mexico, USA. I'm an emergency physician and an EMS physician. I don't know what the IRCP is for that. EMS physician, Gary, but also a paramedic. And the official title of this is Multidisciplinary Team Structure. The Tribal Community Paramedic Program allows for rapid, coordinated approach to urgent public health concern. But the real title is Why You Shouldn't Check Email on Mother's Day, or Why You Should. So that, I think, will perhaps become evident here in just a few minutes. So thank you for spending time here to listen to this. So as I was putting this presentation together, I always wonder, anytime you put a presentation together, you wonder, well, what do you want to say? And often that's kind of at the end, that's your conclusion. But I wanted to put the conclusion at the beginning here because the real moral of the story is that the patient is at the center of everything we do. And one of the real exciting things about community paramedicine right now is that's what we're really trying to do. This is no longer bringing the patient to the center of care, it's we're bringing the care to the patient, centered in the patient's own habitat. So what I'm about to do is tell you a story. This is a case presentation officially, but it's really a story. Now it's not as exciting as driving 3 hours in a Land Cruiser over through rivers and stuff like that for a STEMI. So I apologize for that. But it is a story about a remote tribal community health response in New Mexico to a specific patient and issue. And this is what I mean by patient-centered, because this response crossed many different out-of-hospital disciplines over 14 days and included your lights and sirens paramedics. It included community paramedics, it included community health representatives, which I'll explain a little bit, and public health nursing, and of course me as well as the medical director for this whole program. So I am the medical director for the for community health and EMS paramedicine program for the Pueblo of Laguna. So that is Pueblo of Laguna is a Native American tribe that's about 70 kilometers west of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And that's all on sealed roads, actually, to get out there. My responsibilities include medical direction for Laguna Fire Rescue, which is something that probably looks very familiar. They provide fire and paramedic response from 3 stations on the Laguna Reservation, and I'll talk more about that this afternoon in a second presentation. But every morning from the shift lieutenant from Laguna Fire Rescue, I receive the detailed daily shift report from the day before. Already looked at today's from yesterday, but this one right here is one that I wanted to go over in particular. Now, this report in general is very valuable for me as the medical director. I use this to see what they've done the day before, obviously, but also to help guide quality assurance and guide future educational activities for them. So this way I can really keep my finger on the pulse of what's going on with this department so that I can help provide as much of my own value to the department. So I really look forward to reading it every day, but that doesn't mean every day. You'll notice that this one right here was for May 12th of 2018. So that means it came to my phone on the morning of May 13th, which is Mother's Day. So this is my wife and daughter, who you've probably all seen over the last 24 hours or so. And we were on vacation on Mother's Day, like a good husband, I suppose. There we were having a good family breakfast, actually, in Alamogordo, New Mexico, which that's also pretty remote. But we were going to have a nice, part of the kickoff for a nice vacation. So this is, again, a story. It's not about Mother's Day. It's not about my family. But that does kind of kick into the very beginning. Because this is a story about community paramedicine and its response to an acute medical condition. Now, anybody who's had a child that's been at least 2 years old will understand that even on Mother's Day you can have a meltdown. So I had a meltdown, and Jenna took her out in the midst of breakfast to go calm her down, and so even though I was on vacation, I checked my phone, right, and the daily report was there. And as I'm just scanning down, it doesn't look too unusual, but then I noticed that. So that's a problem, right? And that, piques my interest. I'm like, oh, somebody got bitten by a bat. It's not your typical drunk fell over. It's not your typical chest pain. It's not even your typical got arrested and somehow developed some acute medical condition. But then I saw no transport. So that was concern. And further down the report, there's a little bit more. This is, of course, not the patient care report, which has even more detail, but just, so that everybody reading it the next morning understands. And so Rescue 1 responded to one of the villages on the reservation for a male who got bit by a bat. No obvious injuries, etc. They told him to wash it off, and he didn't want to go to the hospital. So now, I have learned that this is not as much of a concern here in New Zealand. So that's exciting for you guys. That may be even a reason to move. But in the United States, bats are high-risk vectors for rabies. And that's bad. So welcome to New Zealand. Rabid bats have been documented in all 49 of the continental United States. Hawaii is rabies-free, another reason to go there, and so is New Zealand. I hear that Australia is rabies-free also, is that correct?
Yes, but everything else will kill you.
Good.
Rabies is the least of your concern.
So great, yeah.
The sharks ate all the rabid animals.
Oh, well, awesome. Well, maybe that's the issue. I don't know, but bats in the United States are increasingly implicated as important wildlife reservoirs for variants of rabies virus transmitted to humans. And it really, even a very minor contact with a bat, well, I think any contact with a bat is pretty major, but anything minor or seemingly unimportant, even unrecognized, if you're like near a bat, that you might catch rabies. And this is actually CDC data that we have. So again, this is not a talk about rabies, it's not a talk about my family, it's not a talk about Mother's Day, but it is a talk about the integration of lights and sirens paramedics with community health representatives, etc. And I've talked about the Laguna Community Paramedic program in IRCP before. You'll hear some more details about it this afternoon, especially for the folks who haven't been at the previous one. But this team has had great success in treating chronic issues in our remote population. But what we had here was not a chronic issue, it was an acute issue, perhaps one that was even under-recognized by the initial treating team. But the team structure that we have in Laguna is part of our community paramedicine initiative. That really helps coordinate the response to this guy's backbite issue, particularly since he was, I think, at best semi-cooperative with the situation. So, just for a background though, for those of you who are lucky enough not to have rabies, it is a progressive neurologic disease that if untreated results in encephalitis, myelitis, and almost certain death. Immediate treatment, if you've been bitten by something that has rabies, is needed to prevent advancement of the disease. And you got to get it before you get the symptoms. So if you're already foaming at the mouth and truly acting crazy, it's too late. We're done. There's only one person who's ever survived that documented. There's a little girl in Wisconsin or Minnesota. I'm not sure. They're right next to each other, so I'm not sure which one's which. But what you need on day one, after you've been bitten, is you need an injection of the human rabies immunoglobulin, HRIG. But you also need an injection of rabies vaccine on day one. But you need it on day 3, day 7, day 14. So this is not just a come in, get a shot, and you're done. This is a complex follow-up, needs to be completed in an orderly fashion. So really, to read that somebody got bitten by a bat and was released without transport and treatment was indeed concerning. So there it was. It's Mother's Day breakfast. I got this bomb on my phone that I should have been looking at. And now my wife and daughter have returned to the breakfast table. So, you know, what do I do? Do I deal with this like true medical concern, which actually could be life-saving? You know, all the stuff we do in medicine, you know, how much is truly life-saving? But if this guy actually got bitten by a rabid bat, you know, and it was in the middle of the day, you know, could be life-saving. But then again, you know, there I am. Everybody's all dressed up. I even had a tie on, I think, which is very unusual for New Mexico. So what do we do? Now, luckily, my wife is also an EMS physician, so she does the same things I do, just different departments. So she understood, and I admitted to her that I checked my email, and she said, "Yeah, you need to make a phone call." So I stepped out and contacted the shift lieutenant, and then got the paramedic on text. Now it's great. There are plenty of parts of that reservation that I can't, that don't have phone service at all. One of them at 3 o'clock New Zealand time this morning found some phone service and called me. But it's hard to communicate, but at least this morning I was able to get in touch with Tina, who is the actual paramedic who was on scene and took the refusal from this bat bite guy. So Tina is a advanced care paramedic. She's actually a FPC, flight paramedic certified. So she is really a sharp medic. But anyway, so I said, look, Tina, you got to go find this guy. Because this is day 2 of their 48-hour shifts. They work 48s. First day, she took the refusal. She's still on duty. I said, you've got to go find this guy because we need to get this guy treated. So here's the initial text. Well, we'll go look for him. Hopefully he's sober. Great. You know, here we go. So that's probably reason number 1 that he got bitten by a bat was that he wasn't sober. But apparently he didn't want to go, and he thought that they could treat him on scene, which is actually extraordinary confidence in our paramedic program. We can't treat bat bites on scene, so unfortunately we didn't. So anyway, but please do your best to find him. So this is, you know, again, a serious medical concern, but, you know, and I'm trying to trying to keep a straight face through this, but I mean, you can't make some of this stuff up, right? So he had this, when they got there, he had a bat in a bag. So, I mean, apparently it like flew out at him and he, you know, did something like that and killed him. And so I'm pretty sure that he had enough contact with this bat to need some sort of rabies treatment. And so she's like, yeah, what do we do with this bat? So, I mean, the technical answer is absolutely you take it with you, it's sent to the state lab, they chop off its head, they do some testing on its brain. And that's the official answer, but it's like when you're actually telling someone to pick up this bat, I don't know. Luckily, it reportedly was already in a bag, and so I gave the easy answer, you know, just put it in another bag and take it with you, and glad I'm not touching it. But Laguna is, like I said, it's about an hour west of Albuquerque, which is where I think the patient needed to go to University of New Mexico Hospital. But this is not an easy story to do on a radio report 5 minutes before you get there, right? So I looked through our scheduling program, and I was like, yes, Andy is on. So Andy, at the time, was a third year, or so final year emergency medicine resident. And he has since graduated and now is one of our new EMS fellows. So he has a background in EMS. I knew him very well, so I was happy to see his name on the list. So I texted Andy. I was like, hey, Andy, Lagoon's come in with a bat patient. And they're also bringing bats. So you can see why I'm excited to have him on board this year as an EMS physician, because of course his quick response was, cool, we got somebody bringing in a bat. You know, this is what he needs, what the patient needs. Not sure how to send the bat to the lab. I'm glad you're there because you're going to figure it out for me. This is what it needs to happen. They'll be looking for you about 45 to 60 minutes. And I'm pretty sure this bat is dead. So, you know, of all the texts that you get when you're in the ER, you know, this is probably one of his more interesting ones, so that was cool. Now, part of this was, you know, also the concern that this was recognized by the crew. And any time that, you know, delivering education, especially in the moments, especially when there's something that you're trying to correct, is difficult, right? I mean, I think Tina is a great paramedic, and I'm really happy to have her on the service, but I was also like, come on, she really does not take this bad guy in. But of course, there's always more to the story, and it's important as a medical director to find that out. And I guess he was not all that cooperative, and maybe it was better. Of course, maybe he already had rabies at that point, unless that's why he's uncooperative, I don't know. But anyway, unfortunately, they couldn't find the bat when they went back. So it's like, seriously? You know, so you have a bat, you put it in a bag, and now you can't find where did it go? Where did this bag go? Did it fly out of the bag? Did something eat it? So who knows? Who knows? We did not solve this part. Please don't be looking for the answer in the next few minutes of what happened to this bat. Anyway, you know, as we're getting closer to the end of the story, you know, I told Andy, look, okay, you guys are not bringing the bat, you know, really what we need to do is make sure he gets the shot and get the follow-up. Andy very rightfully realized that saying just make sure he gets the follow-up after the shot is the difficult part, right? Because this is a 1, 3, 7, and 14-day shot. It's not easy. And this guy is already shown that he's not that interested in contact with the medical system. He's frequently not sober, and he is frequently at least an hour away from medical care. So day 3. We made it to day 3, and it's time for his second shot. Now, day 1 of this was very much within the realm of traditional lights and sirens paramedicine, right? So you come to the scene, somebody's bit by a bat, okay, whatever, didn't take him in, but now you've gone back, you should bring him in. And that's all, you know, that's all very ambulance-based, nothing exciting about that. But really, our community paramedicine team, which is actually, we call it the community care team of the Laguna Community Health and Wellness Department, so we don't even call it community paramedicine. It just encompasses a lot of the out-of-hospital care that we provide there, is multi-situational as it is multidisciplinary. One of the functions of the community health representatives on that team, so we have community health representatives in addition to the community paramedics, and those are CHRs. Another term in the United States is community health worker that kind of does some of the similar thing. I'm not sure what the corresponding term is in the other countries represented in this audience, but really they are paraprofessionals that have limited medical training but help out with a lot of healthcare details like medical transportation. And because of the remote location of this reservation and also kind of the poverty level and the lack of transportation, the CHRs do a lot of the driving people back and forth to appointments. So day one, sure, was a licensed signers type of situation. Day three is definitely CHR. We don't need an ambulance to pick up this guy and go get a shot for the second time. So we've got him on schedule, right? Day three, 8:30 in the morning, be at the university in downtown Albuquerque, no problem. I'll roll over and go back to sleep type of thing, right? Well, of course, I get an urgent phone call in the morning, can't find him. Day three, he needs to come back for his shots. We can't find him. So, even though this was now, Tina was now off shift, I texted her. So it's important to note that Tina is not one of the community paramedics. We have two community paramedics, Tony and Fern, you'll see their pictures later today. But she is a paramedic from the community. She's a paramedic from the community, and one of the key parts of our program's success is the investment that each team member has in the community. It truly is a community program, and in this way, really, all of the Laguna Fire Rescue paramedics are essentially, if unofficially, part of the team. And so this is why I called her, because I knew that she probably had the best information about where to find this patient. And sure enough, she said it's usually at Blue Box's house, working in the yard. And does he have to go back today? And yes, and Maureen is one of the community health representatives. And because we don't have addresses really on the reservation, she gave the typical directions. His house is next to the Kiva, next to a little barbershop. Kiva is a religious structure for the tribe. And then I hope she knows where that's at. I apologize for the maceration of Queen's English here in Texas. Anyway, so we sent Lorraine over there. Now, we got to get to the end of the story, of course. And though the CHR office had arranged for transport that day, we had multiple different folks looking for him. So I called our actual community paramedics. I called our CHRs. I called Tina. We were looking for him. I called the university. I was like, hey, look, I found some other friends on the list of who was working that morning. I said, please be on the lookout for this guy. If he shows up, all he needs is a shot. So just grab him, give him the shot, and tell him when to come back. Because he's probably not going to wait in the waiting room like the other 100 people that are already there, probably. So there we are, just now trying to figure this out. And then of course, poof, he shows up at the hospital. We had all this stuff arranged for him to get there, and he somehow found. I think he was probably drunk in Albuquerque and got a friend to take him, but that was. I'm not sure how that. I'm not sure how that happened. So he was treated quickly, and actually, days 7 and 14 are really anticlimactic. He got his ride from CHR, and everything was fine. A little side note before we get to the conclusion here. Rabies is a reportable disease in all of the states in the United States, including New Mexico. And his case was reported to the New Mexico Department of Health on his first emergency department visit. But since the bite occurred on a reservation, the New Mexico Department of Health did not have jurisdiction, and they didn't have direct access to the patient for follow-up. It's actually a big problem. So they were kind of panicking too. So they were finally able to contact the public health nurse on the reservation, who contacted me, and they shared the treatment plan, which luckily we had already successfully enacted at the hospital, but it was an interesting case of how a state program doesn't really penetrate into the reservation. So the lessons learned from this somewhat lighthearted, humorous backbite. The patient could have very easily been lost to follow-up at several points in his case. But he really benefited from the fact that this truly is a team and it truly is a community. Yes, we have your regular emergency paramedics. Yes, we've got community paramedics, CHRs, public health nurses, we've got me. But really what we had was the whole team came together as a community to take care of this patient. And so really the community paramedic concept depends as much on the community as it depends on the paramedic. And I hope that that's what you can really take away from this and you can take away for your programs. Because really there is a strong role in the community for this kind of team, and a strong role of community in this part of the team, regardless of skills and regardless of job title. And I think it's really important to have that level of investment in the program at every level to really make this work as a community. We've got to make sure that our teams adapt to our patients and not the other way around. That's what's so exciting about community paramedicine is that's kind of what we're doing. We're kind of leading that charge for healthcare in general. But that's what we have to do. So I'll close with this picture. The Laguna team is very close to my heart for many reasons, but this here is my daughter, who is right there in the back of one of their ambulances. And this is one of their great lights and sirens teams. But don't worry, this is actually just a stage photo shoot for GEMS. We had an article about, unrelated actually to Laguna, but had a good model for it, and we were able to take a few pictures. So she is quite involved in the community paramedicine program, and she is, as I'm on the porch of somebody's house there, but kicking back in the car. So community is very important in these programs. So happy to take any questions. All right, our next presenter is Peter O'Meara. Is Mary going to join you? No? Talking about developing a global paramedic program accreditation framework for the higher education sector. As Peter starts, the gentleman from PEI brought some promotional material. I'm going to pass those out as you start. Give you a little sense of where you'll be going each year.
That's all right.
Okay, not only do I have to follow a fabulous story by Chelsea, I compete with tourism in New Zealand now. No, I don't. Thanks for the privilege of this conference again. I think this is the 11th time I've spoken at this conference, so it's been a while. And this is entirely different to the more recent presentations we've had. It's nothing clinical, it's nothing to do with research actually. So, very different, and it's about, as the title said, the development of a global accreditation program for paramedicine. And it's a bit of an ambitious project that a number of us involved in. And we're going to explain what we're doing and how we're going about it. So the first thing, the structure of the talk is we'll talk about how paramedics are transitioning. And I think pretty much know that. About our council, the approach we're taking, how far we've got, and where we're going to go, and then give you an opportunity for some questions. And then at the very end, we're actually going to tell you who's on the council. And this is the first time this has happened. No one's actually seen the whole list except, I think, Mary and myself. So there's a number of people in the room who are on the council, and it's a very exciting time for us, and we'll see how the whole process goes. Firstly, as we know, and it's been alluded to while we've been here, is that paramedics transition from our beginnings in military emergency service settings, responding to emergencies that, we call type attitude that's happened over a period of time. And paramedics have become increasingly autonomous health professionals. Now this varies from country to country, jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but that's sort of the trend that's happening, and it's moving along. And at the same time, education is moving. We've seen a major transition of education from the vocational sector to the higher education sector in a number of countries. Some of those countries are pretty predictable, UK, Australia, New Zealand. Some are quite surprising. Do people know that there's degree programs for paramedics in Turkey? Do you know that there's actually very well established degree programs for paramedics in Poland? So, let's not think that it's restricted to particular countries. There's actually a lot of countries around, and this is not an extensive list, there's more. And so there's this transition happening in concert with moves to autonomous practice. But what that raises is that we have all these people running around with degrees, and we don't really know how to compare them together. And I know the UK's been going through this. They hire a lot of paramedics, degree qualified paramedics from Australia, New Zealand, and Poland. Now, they've obviously worked that out, but it's not very transparent for the rest of us. So there's a real need to actually have some sort of accreditation so that we can compare apples with apples. Now, one way to do it is, like John said yesterday, testing. That doesn't sort of help to say, well, are the courses actually comparable? Are the tests fair? Do the tests make sense? But this is all part of the jigsaw. It's not one thing. We're not saying you shouldn't be testing. We're not saying you should be. What we're saying is that there needs to be accreditation courses. Now, in some countries there are, and the processes are actually quite good, but other countries there's nothing, and we can't really compare them adequately. So we've established the Global Paramedic Higher Education Council, and the idea is that we'll be autonomous and offer something to people throughout the world. Some parts of the world will need a lot of help, some will need not very much. And we understand that. We understand there's already processes in place in some of these areas. So, we're not trying to usurp what's already there. We're actually trying to strengthen it and make it more consistent and set some standards for accreditation. These are our general purposes, which is pretty straightforward. Where our concentration is on higher education courses. We're not particularly interested in certificate courses ran by, the college down the road, or someone did that yesterday, or an ambulance service, or, just some little course that's ran by someone. We're interested in courses that are in universities where it's emerging. We're interested in basic entry-level courses. And as I said, some countries have well-established accreditation processes, we understand that. There's not a lot of accreditation courses in the specialist areas, such as critical care, or transport, whatever you want to call it, community paramedicine, ECPs, all that thing. There's actually not very much that we know of in terms of accreditation, apart from the universities themselves obviously accredit their own courses as universities, but it's not specific to the discipline. So that's what we're actually interested in looking at and assisting. Now the way we're going to do it, or we are doing it, is we're using a 4-step approach. This comes from me, because I like this approach. So the idea is we're collecting the data, we're finding out what other people do in terms of accreditation. So we looked at other parts of the world in terms of paramedicine, Australia, US, UK. We also looked at other disciplines too, because we need some consistency across disciplines, not just within paramedicine. We're not that special, sorry. We have to actually work within the health area in that domain, and we have to convince other disciplines that our training and education is good and makes sense. We don't live in a bubble. And we've been doing some review and analysis of that in a preliminary sense. And then the next step is to develop an accreditation framework. Now the way we're going about it is we could have just started on the general one, general entry paramedic program, but we've actually decided to start with community paramedicine because it's actually need and there's nothing else out there. So as I said, the general entry, a lot of countries have already done it. So we're not going to try and duplicate people. We've only got limited resources. And then the idea is to implement it. What we hope to do is have a global paramedic education standard accreditation framework, have a database of accredited programs so that people can actually look up a program and see, is this accredited? Who by? What's it mean? And, we're not making big judgment on, which course is better than the other. The idea is not to rank them or anything like that. And hopefully what we'll end up with is a global network of paramedic accreditation bodies. But we're not trying to conquer the world. We're just trying to get people together and have some consistency. So where are we up to? We've actually, in the process of establishing the councils, we did this by expression of interest, which we sent out through various networks, and we used our own networks, and people put up their hands and said, I'm interested in one of these councils. So there's one general council, which is sort of like a governance body, and it's a high level policy group. And then we've got 2 councils. One is about critical care, and we've had people nominate and have been selected who have expertise in that area. Now it might be expertise as a clinician, it could be expertise in education or accreditation. So there's a mix of skills on each of them. And the same with the Community Paramedic Council. And some of the people on the specialty councils are also on the Central Council. So there's some continuity and some connection between them. So they're not actually 3 separate bodies. These are the speciality councils are actually subsets of the main council. And I would imagine that certainly in the early days that the community paramedic group and the critical care group would be the people who do most of the work. Because they've got expertise, they've got interest in that area. But they are different, and we've tried very hard to get people from all over the world. We've been partially successful. Most of the members, because of the way it's been formed, are from North America, but there are Australians, there's people from the UK, and we have one very outstanding person from Japan, and some of the people we've recruited from the US in particular speak Spanish, and that's actually quite important if we want to connect with South America or some of the other countries in the world. So these are our aims. So our overall aim is to facilitate employment mobility and improve health outcomes. Probably should have done more, you can argue that point. And the interesting thing is that we're actually using the World Health Organization framework. to develop the accreditation system we're suggesting. And this is to make it truly international. We could have easily just say, oh, you know, Australia and New Zealand, they have this accreditation set up for paramedics, we'll just take that off the shelf and we'll apply it to the rest of the world because ours is the best. And then the Americans would say, well, we've got one too. That's the best. It can't all be right. So what we've decided to do is actually take a medical model from the World Health Organization that's already been endorsed and adapted. So that's the way we're moving on. So we're going to look at, as I said, at degree level programs for entry level, eventually we'll do that, and we're going to look at the postgraduate level, again through higher education systems. So I'd say we're not interested in someone who's doing a quick and dirty course in an ambulance service because they want to have an ECP program in 3 months. Not interested. We'll certainly take notice of what's going on, but we encourage people to go through universities or equivalents. So the document that we've adapted comes from the World Federation of Medical Education. It's their basic education standards for quality. Now, this is a really interesting document. They have a standing working party on this, and they update the standards every 5 years, I think it is. And it's actually, when you look at it, you can see that the Australian New Zealand accreditation guidelines for paramedicine is based on it. It's got the same structure, same wording, with some amendments. So it's very similar to that. The Australian model for accreditation actually came from the UK. So we've taken it from the UK, but the UK obviously got it from this document. I'm not sure how, but they did. The other thing is that it's actually the model that's used for medicine in Australia, UK, and the US. And what we're thinking is that, you know, one of the issues, big issues, is accreditation programs in the US because it's so big, so many programs, and it's so confusing. And as Chelsea was demonstrating, the medical directors are really important in the US. So it's no good coming up with something the medical directors won't accept. So the idea is to actually go down the track of using a medical model, which has been tested and proven, and adapt it to the paramedicine world. And that way you get buy-in from the medical community in the US, as well as being consistent with other programs around the world. So that's what we've done. We've actually going down the track of a community paramedic approach rather than trying to do everything at once. The other group will get going once we get them in place and so forth, and depends what they want to do. But we're not trying to cut across the stuff that John's doing with exams and so forth. We're trying to do something quite different. It's about the program. Now, the thing to make clear about the standards is that we're not saying that everything needs to be the same. We're not saying that every program will satisfy every criteria, because everything is contextual. You know, we know that, you know, a place like Japan, we know that the education of paramedics is really good in Japan. Surprisingly, you know, we just don't have much knowledge of this. But their scope of practice is really narrow and not very developed. So their education is way above their scope of practice. And other places, the scope of practice is high and the education is pretty ordinary. So we need to get some consistency. But we do understand that you can't just apply a model across countries and across cultures, you know, sort of a blind fashion. There needs to be some consideration of local circumstances. Now, the standards themselves, this is how they're set up, and the people who are familiar with the accreditation program in Australia and New Zealand will recognise these. There's actually 9 areas with some sub-areas, and it's pretty self-explanatory. And it all just goes through in detail the sub-factors of what really matters, and they come at 2 levels. It's the must comply and should, could comply. The idea is you get a sort of a level that's the basic, okay, this course is legit, it's okay, And then you have sort of more aspirational goals. So that's the way it works. On the original medical model, there's actually a whole heap of annotations which explain things. I found confusing, so we've left them out, and we'll just wait for people to ask questions. Then we'll try and annotate if necessary, rather than just confuse people right from the start. That's how it sort of works. We've actually got a copy, but we haven't sent it out for consultation with the council. So, but if someone wants to, contact us a little bit, I can't say that there's a problem. So the next step over the next 2-3 years is to get these councils up and running and working, because it's fine to have it on paper and have vision and all that sort of thing, but we actually have to get the groups to work together. We're going to, the first thing to do is consult with the Community Paramedicine Council on that set of standards. And that'll be really interesting over the coming weeks as we send that out and say, well, this is what we've done. What do you think we should do from here? Do you think it's a good idea? Do you think it's terrible? We don't know. But we're reasonably confident, but we'll see how we go. So we've written the draft standards, they're ready for input. Then we want to trial the accreditation, have a program to actually have a crack at it. So we're looking for sites. If anyone's interested in putting up their hand to say, look, do you want to be a guinea pig? That would be good. And we're still developing the processes. We haven't actually spoken to CIA yet, but we'd like to talk to them to see if we can borrow some of their processes. Having been through the CIA accreditation process, it would be great if we'd actually simplify it. Universities find it fairly a lot of work, and we don't want to actually create another system that's a whole lot of work. So if we could simplify a lot of the things and just say, you're a registered university, yes, you do have libraries, they all have libraries. Do we have to prove it? I don't think so. And once the trial's done, we'll implement the whole program. So that's our vision for what we'll do over the next 2-3 years. Now, there's an opportunity for questions at this stage, but I do want to go through and actually show you who's on the councils. So at this juncture, Helen, we've got good questions, Gary. Given that I've got a little more to do. Right.
We've got 6 minutes.
6 minutes, okay. So questions about what we've spoken about so far? No specific.
So, Peter, do you think that one of the long-term goals would be better workforce portability? So if you have this accreditation standard, it would be much easier for, say, a regulatory body in Australia to look at a person with qualification from Canada or from Poland, and they'll then fast track the kind of international applicant process.
Yeah, the question is about mobility of the workforce, and we think it will. We know that with registration coming in Australia, that mobility from the UK will be pretty easy, and it's been pretty successful because our programs are accredited in a similar way, and that could extend to other countries. And it's particularly important as Canada, for instance, is currently got a vision to have bachelor's degrees by 2025, and if that comes to fruition, it would be nice to actually be able to judge where people are coming to and from, because I imagine that the Canadians, there would be a fair market for degree qualified paramedics from around the world if you look at the UK. So yeah, mobility is one of the aims, but of course that's only part of it. The main part is to actually ensure that the community gets good care and consistent care. Lots of us travel internationally. It'd be nice to have confidence in that.
Peter, do you think there'll be an associated cost with this?
Cost?
Yeah.
Everything costs. Yes, there will be some cost. So we have to make it worthwhile for the institutions to say we're accredited internationally. There needs to be something in it, and some, standard status, all that sort of thing. We know that, say, the Australian undergraduate programs, they're already accredited, and all we probably say is that courses that are accredited by the Australian system, which will come under the board, are fine. that's all, and there won't be any cost of that, but, yeah. But if a country or a program wants to have an accreditation done, there's obviously going to be some costs. And we have no idea what that might be. Well, Mary might know, but I don't.
One more quick one, Peter. Do you think one of the other benefits of this is while we do have quite robust accreditation programs in places like the UK and Australia, that there's these emerging markets like Malaysia and Singapore and places that are kind of reaching out to places that have had training for some time. India as well, I know, is developing some degrees who are less likely to have a robust accreditation framework. So is there kind of a developmental aspect to that in terms of emerging nations?
Yeah, emerging nations are interesting, and that's what the medical framework's found, is that they've done the same thing. They've said, look, you know, this is already done in these countries, it's fine, but there's countries that don't have the infrastructure to do it, and they're sending teams out to developing countries to help with the accreditation. And, you know, and obviously that's why it's important to get some people with some language skills and cultural understanding of other countries. And, you know, if we send a team out to, you know, India, we need to, you know, reach out and get some people who actually can communicate with people in India, for instance. You can't just charge in there and be culturally insensitive. And it's a team thing. It's not, as I say, it's not about rating one program against another. People can do that over a year. They don't need us to get involved with it. Okay? All right, we'll move on. Gary's looking to watch.
Yeah.
So, these are the council members representing what we've said, administration. So these are different, there's colleges of health services, there's Josephine who was coming, but daughter's too busy being an Olympian. And the asterisk means the person has actually got back from Burnham. Also Walter Tavers, who was mentioned in the slide 2 presentations ago, Mike Nolan from Canada, many people know. She goes from Hawaii, amazing person. And Kevin Armstrong's from the UK. And we have practitioners represented on the council from US, Australia, the main ones there at that level. The council's at large, and we've done this to sort of really try and balance it up a little bit, and there's, you know, some opportunity for us to add people if need be. We have a person from Japan, various parts of the US. Bill Ranovic's involved, he's very well connected. He runs one of the few clinical degree programs in the US. For many years he's now retired and has lots of time, I think, when he's not being a tourist. Tim Stairs is from Canada. He knows a lot about self-regulation, representing Paramedics Association of Canada. So they're the council members, and nearly all accepted. The speciality councils, this is the Community Paramedic Council. All the best people have accepted, which is absolutely fantastic because we really need to get them working. You'll see through this list, it doesn't, not obvious here unless you know the people, but there's a mixture of disciplines. Anne Montera is a nurse, and there's some doctors and paramedics and so forth. So, you know, we're not trying to do this in some sort of isolation. We just look at our own neighbours. So that's the community paramedic group. It's the critical care group. And as you can see, there's a mixture of the US and Canada and Australia, and there's the old Canadians. So that's sort of the group. Yeah.
Is it, people on the council, are they mostly people with clinical backgrounds?
Sorry?
People on the council, are the people with clinical backgrounds? I'm curious if there's anybody who
Yes.
has social scientific backgrounds. I mean, especially for the community paramedicine program. I mean, there are disciplines who study communities and might very well be able to.
There's a lot of people who are cross-qualified, who have multiple qualifications. So they might be a paramedic, but they're qualified in something else as well. And they've got really good networks.
Anybody from the social sciences?
Social scientists,
Yeah.
me. But there's others as well. Yeah, plenty of social scientists, plenty of people with scientific backgrounds, medical backgrounds, nursing, legal, to people with legal backgrounds and regulatory backgrounds. So we're trying to get a cross-section, but it did rely on people putting up their hands. We reached out to people and said, who wants to be involved? And these are essentially the people who put up their hands. We can't go and actually conscript people to be involved. But if we need something, the networks these people have got are sufficient to be able to reach out and get an expert. These are not poorly connected people. So that's the membership. It's up and running. Those who are on the community paramedic group will get a chance to have input, as well as the main council for the community paramedics. And these are our contact details. And that's it. And people can ask us questions. Mary is part of it. Stand up, Mary. Stand on the chair, Mary. I think she's getting short, isn't she? Stand up, Mary. So ask Mary questions. We can ask me questions. And correspond with us.
I think one thing here that's important is if there are people in the room that would like to get involved in the council, on the GPEC website, it's gpec.org, there is the ability to send us an expression of interest. So if you are interested in going on one of these councils in the future, we'd love to have you. So feel free to send us an expression.
Yeah, the reality is if you have a dozen people put up their hand to do something, one or two will drop off for various reasons, and we'll need replacements. So it's pretty open, and maybe you just want to make a comment about something in particular. You don't want to be on the council, but you just want to say, that's fine. We're open to that. That's it.
So we had council meetings or formation meetings in the UK, and did you want to Saskatoon? We've had a couple, and that's where the expressions of interest came, but we'll likely have one in PEI next year as well. We're on break now until 11 o'clock.
That's it, yeah.
was just thinking, some of those things. Never seen so Ron he'll oh, right. Yeah, so he yeah. Yeah, so you know, that's an interesting thing to mention. We work with a gentleman in Baltimore, he's a UK journalist. And he just so uses all of our
For one second. So you guys are actually one of the sociologists. My PhD is
Eventually, they're going to have the bridging thing less of the things about people still be there for one to do well established. Eventually,
this is my old job. I will get one. Because it's really interesting your proposal. And I've been
But I think that's a great
process.
solution.
Of course, they asked it.
That really does include
So I'd be happy to. There's something that I can do. So
Let me,
I will.
actually,
I'll drop you a
seriously,
seriously.
you have any question, but I don't know how.
the theory studies are very, very close. I mean, webmaster, right?
No, but he asked us to tell me, and it takes me several days to sort out exactly what it is. And then when I transfer, he's like, no, that's not what I meant.
It'll actually need a translation, but you know. But yeah, I mean, I know that he was also, that he
Yeah.
stuff was sort of. I mean, what do you know? It's online now.
Yeah, so Trevor and Aaron just started. Aaron said they wrote the art office, right? They started it's all linked to New Brunswick. Trauma. Trauma system. My research is about how EMS organizes, the social organization.
And it's very different. This one, I had, that's one of the reasons I was such a big correction.
And you guys own, so EMS doesn't report into the license of the position? Canada, Canada, that's what it is.
No, we are actually,
In Canada.
we are actually registered. Will be, the registration process starts in August.
Yeah.
But we never reported but under the new system, we'll be registered in our own right as a autonomous commission. In the same way as officers. 15 nationalists.
So you guys excited for that?
Yeah, well, it'll take a lot of work. So we never actually had a culture. Some doctors only go on services about others. But I know when I was a medic, it was very nice.
environment.
What if you didn't draw it? Like,
It's just, we have, some people argue, no, it's actually, but it's close to the
how many times?
Yeah, we got good.
So is that,
Paul will be so much
because they were thinking, and Paul, well, they won skiing or something. Yeah.
So I should do.
Oh, okay.
You know, so far you basically. So I know it's been good. You know, my cousin. Last time I was on was in the summer.
Did you go the argument?
I love discussion, so. I'm supposed to be able to report a single game guy next year. Yeah. You know, but yeah, drop us an email. I will, absolutely. That'll be okay, yeah. Address is on the thing. Yeah, I wrote it down. See you later. Yeah, because I used to teach sociology to the paramedic students on the universities I was at. Nursing, I had a coordination at Queen's University. I love our courses, but probably they do some sort of such that's our sociology is a context analysis. What's this? It's pretty useless, it's not bucket anymore, it's something else. That sounds pretty good. And you know, when you get the cup that's got a design on it, and you have two. The person standing on it. And they see something completely different. They say, well, no, it's the same thing, but you're actually seeing it differently. And that's what it is.
Turn on my distractions. Usually, and hoping someone will get up and make some distractions stop. Otherwise, they're always going to stick a slide look. Then the kind of funny when you walk down with my towel, you drive cracked up inside. What I love is that
What's going on?
I'm sure if I've got I've been proprietary players.
Instead of being able to understand why it is that they keep on seeing. Whatever, right? So part of it is there's nothing. No, it's not right. The social terms, I don't say it's highly but you know, having that social imagination, I mean, is one way, not all the way broad. Yeah, so we're gonna, part of it is social understanding you need nuance and empathetic ways. And the biomedical model doesn't teach us that. It's empathetic. And it's
So my 35 years, you don't have to drive patient.
Oh, no, but I was talking, you can't do much except try and my socialism. Perhaps the old system. That sort of stuff. And I mean, it's an interesting thing, you know, and I think that's why we grew up. Like, community care medicine, like, the paramedics do all day, every single day. Well, I mean, that's what they do. But the university was at.
First year of course. So I have to get most of the students for our first couple of
use your technology as highly associated.
You'd love to actually, one of my former colleagues now, and one of my students, she just graduated and she did our storytelling department. And she started off, she started interviewing their stories. So it's two different technical issues and problems with access to them. Anyway, in the end, she decided that rather than other people, she could actually tell her own stories. So she crafted 50 stories, 60 stories. The stuff that you tell the students, you know, in class or over a year or whatever. She told her own stories and advised them.
So we call that autobiography.
Yeah.
That's what she did.
Yeah, and you
And
find
you
it
know,
really interesting.
even coming here, I think there needs to be some sort of, and clinical research is great, but I think we can have quality health research on campus, as we see nursing as a campus. It'd be nice if there was some sort of hub or some sort of, way to organize our research. Because we keep hearing, we need more research, we need more research.
We're gonna do that.
We had Engineers Day, I'm a medical sociologist, we heard some clinical people. Yes, and I mean, it'd be great to be able to have some sort of way to connect the research and that's beyond operational stuff. Because it's not just that wide of one piece of puzzle.
We're gonna do that for the global permit. And SAS, when we were in SAS, our program is on that.
It depends who's presenting. Like every other one I've presented is social research.
I think
The
maybe
first one I have done.
I think maybe next time I do submit a presentation for why quality of research.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I do.
One of the things we could do, and we could actually have now, just make a suggestion. Remember the panel we did in Canada?
Yeah.
You being Mike Nolan?
Yeah.
We could do something like that and actually challenge the paradigm.
Okay. Done
Yeah.
deal.
Or we could have fun.
Done deal.
Like, we just winged it, didn't we?
Yeah.
What did we talk about? Something to do with community pyramids and
I know it was about the issues we have.
we actually got interviewed by a news anchor in Canada. Well-known person. Oh, some lady. She was really good. Like, she's really well known in Canada. I can't remember her name. So she interviewed us to see if we were on TV. And we just sat around in the lounge chairs and they watched us. Basically, the interview. And we had not a lot of detail about what she was going to ask us. And that was deliberate. She said, oh no, I'm not going to take questions. We're going to make it spontaneous.
Actually, there's somebody
We really had to wing it.
There's somebody who works in government, he was a former reporter. And so she's part of the communications where I work. I like that.
Yeah. The format's not setting contract. Yeah. Anyway, send us an
I
email.
will. I'll do it.
I'll also send you back Susan's details. Probably like
I will.
whatever.
That'd be great. I'm a real big fan of autobiography. In fact, before I left college, my wife, Colin, we were going to do a autobiography
Yeah.
on
And,
our experience teaching folks.
and look, it was a fantastic read. And Bill Ranovic really actually did the presentation. He was a paramedic. What a read. Yeah. And he said everything because he'd been a paramedic. He said, it makes sense. Oh, I've been accepted. She's walked across the stage.
No, like, has she published it outside the district?
No.
Okay, so it's that.
I published one of her stories in a chapter. I contributed myself and a colleague from the University of Sociologist. As well. We wrote a chapter on medicine and spirituality. It's part of a book for allied health. And then she submitted it. And it just got published at Trinity College. Well, that's actually quite good. I can send you the details of that.
Look for your call. Yeah. You can see it. Okay. Yeah.
Let's go. Pretty much water, it'll be okay.
Homesick, mate? Homesick.
That's what love is seeing, the local security with businesses.
But that's fun to take
Oh, did you bring it in?
In the country, yeah.
Yeah. Why?
In my bag. I didn't know if I could get one here. For what I want to do.
Are you presenting?
Do you get interesting questions when you go to the customs?
That's what we were just talking about.
I reckon there was a front door that sniffed my bag when I saw that.
You guys got a child in a bag.
Upside down with something that's metal with chest.
They probably just went, oh, ignore it. It's easy. It'll be just easier to ignore that.
Yeah, look, I
Not
didn't
the
see that.
paperwork will be hard. You can see it.
Child? What child?
Yeah.
Out of nowhere, the drug sniffing dog came in customs.
Hey, was it the drug or the fruit?
I'm sure they did too.
Hey.
What's with the kid in the bag?
It's the third one we've seen today.
I'm all just saying. So I'm looking forward to going to the Maldives because we're taking a mega terrible kid. And
Oh boy.
yeah, that'll look funny.
Yeah, that'll look funny.
Oh wow.
Just stole a little kid from the mat. When you leave, it'll be worse.
Yeah. Okay, show me the child.
Mm.
Sure works. Think it works.
Wow.
Some people will actually possibly
Yeah.
So we lost. With Scott Stewart.
Gonna make me run sick, Jonathan.
I thought of that for you. I'll catch Duncan. We lost it.
I did. Yeah.
Okay, Duncan, you know where we're at on time.
Hmm?
You know where we're at on time.
Good.
Oh, I'm sorry for it. No, I think we'll probably be all right. Like I said, I had the ability to extend because I couldn't fall. But you know, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
You've got a lot of it. Right this way.
They turned up, all right.
Very nice. Do you agree?
Is that one?
Nice. And you said it doesn't make noise.
It ain't summer anymore.
Now it's on.
Oh. It doesn't make noise, it doesn't. This one apparently does. That's true.
Now I get annoyed.
Very real, isn't it?
But like Keith's toy.
things in my pockets.
Evan? You want to hurry him up? Yeah.
All right, we're going to get started. Our next speaker is from Macau, and he's going to talk about environmental methods of simulation in paramedic education.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be here in New Zealand, my first time. Thank you for all sort of coming in and as we continue on with our conversations in IRCP. My presentation's a little bit different, less about research and more about our development of future paramedics and application of other techniques with current serving paramedics as well. So looking at the environmental factors associated with how we implement simulation technology, scenarios and other things like that. One of our speakers earlier today, Chelsea, he's not in the room, but talking about the bat in the bag. This sort of caught my attention. Now, for our Australian paramedics in the room, especially those that have worked in far and remote Queensland, I'm sure you've had your fair share of patients that have rocked up to you with a snake in the bag. Sometimes the snake's in two pieces, sometimes the snake's still moving in the bag, and the first thing you know about it is when they point it out in the ambulance beside you while you're treating them and wrapping up the snake bite. So yes, I've had my fair share of those, even where they've tried to kill the snake and ended up hurting themselves, but they still managed to catch the snake and limp in with the sort of stake through the foot, snake in the other hand. So it's interesting to see that other side of the world perspective where they might have bats where we have our snakes. So I found that very intriguing. Okay, so I've got a few things that I'll be mentioning today. So just from a basic disclaimer perspective, I'm not here to advertise any of the companies or any of the equipment that are mentioned here. So this is not a marketing ploy or anything like that. They just happen to be either examples of things I've come across and implemented in my own training workplace, or that's the equipment that we currently have in place to facilitate our simulation. So a little about me. I'm the Foundational Program Director of the Griffith University Bachelor of Paramedicine, one of the last paramedic degrees to be built in Australia and recently accredited by the CAA. I've now stepped away from that role as Program Director, working as a senior lecturer whilst trying to complete my PhD. So workload was very interesting, so something had to give. So I've now handed that over to a new Program Director, and my PhD studies is focusing around international ambulance models and comparison of those models in developed and developing countries. So I still work part-time with the Queensland Ambulance Service in the spare time that I have. With fellow academics in the room that sort of also maintain their clinical skill sets can sort of see that would be quite challenging with a PhD, senior lecturing, and sometimes fitting in some ambulance work. Occasionally I sleep, and that's when I need a rest. But yes, working in the community paramedic capacity, and occasionally, if there's no spots in there, I'll still run around on trucks with everyone else. It's been a while since I've worked in a full-time capacity in the QAS, so I can work almost incognito with people not recognising who I once was, and I can just be little Joe Blow, ambulance officer, floating around from case to case. It's quite lovely. Research interests, simulation methodologies, and as I mentioned before, international ambulance models and things like that, and I'll touch on that a little bit towards the end of the lecture today. So that little picture up there is our first graduating cohort from Griffith University's paramedic program. They graduated July 18 this year. 39 students graduated, and out of those 39 students, 24 already have jobs and started yesterday. The remaining decided not to do their application process until they finished all their studies. So they're in the final process now of going through the selection process in the various ambulance services in Australia. A few applied overseas. So it'd be interesting to see how many out of that initial 39 end up getting full-time employment. But 24 is not a bad start, I must say. So we're quite proud of them. Okay, so if I say the word simulation, what would most people in this room say? So feel free to stick your, we don't need a microphone, just yell it out. It's all good, fairly relaxed.
Resuscitation.
Resuscitation, what else?
Rubber dolly land.
What was that, sorry?
Rubber dolly land.
Yep, what else? Come on.
Scenario.
Scenario? What about cost? Cost would probably be the first, I'll put my MBA hat on now and my Master of Commerce hat on. Cost would probably be one of the first things that comes into a manager's perspective. And the other thing sort of associated with cost, I would say return on investment. So what's the point spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on this equipment if it sits there and gathers dust? So managers in the room, would you say cost would be a fairly significant aspect of your implementation of simulation? What about training? It's all very well you spend thousands of dollars on equipment and thousands of dollars on training people, but what happens when that person moves on? Where does that knowledge go? How is that passed on? Okay, aspects like that. So from a simulation perspective, the other things like logistics, where do you store it? These mannequins aren't big, and if you look at any of the new medium to high fidelity mannequins that are available today, you will see they come inside boxes that are almost stand as high as you. And that's just the upper torso. The bottom torso, the legs, is the same. So you've got space to store this stuff. So that causes an issue. You've got building scenarios. Who builds them? Who maintains them? How do you maintain the currency of what's happening? Effectiveness of scenario. So what are your learning objectives, outcomes? How are you going to achieve that? So it's a fairly basic, broad overview of how simulation works. If you ask the average student paramedic, or the average paramedic on the road, I don't think too many of them would come up with many of, other than the cost, I don't think too many of them will come up with the other aspects of what we have up there today. So, simulation, how does it work for you? Well, everyone in this room will have a different aspect of how simulation can be applied and beneficial to your organisation. From a university perspective, working in the undergraduate space, so these are people straight out of high school, some have other degrees, some have decided to change careers. We apply it from a fundamental basic all the way up to high acuity to their level. Okay, so particularly for the students that we graduate, we try to graduate a student that's at that IRCP level, skill set, but have an understanding and knowledge of the next skill set above them should they require assistance. So they're not just, so if they get a patient that's sort of above their ability to treat, manage and care, they know why they need to call that next level of care or that consultation line to bring in the assistance they need. So that's how we have our simulation work for us. But we don't just sit there with our basic plastic rubber mannequins and other aspects like that. We incorporate many of the environmental factors that I'm going to talk about today. So, rattle off some environmental factors or methods and things. What would you say they would be? Feel free to yell that out again. How would you identify that in a simulation perspective? What would you say an environmental factor is?
Noise.
Noise. What else?
Temperature.
Temperature?
Light.
Light?
English.
English, that's very good. And we actually have a defibrillator that we use occasionally that's in English and Spanish. And it is great when you turn that AED on and start speaking to the students in Spanish because they just look at it and go, what do I do? Where realistically, follow the flashing light. It's not that hard. All right, so weather. Someone mentioned weather. That is quite interesting because many of the scenarios that students do, it's done in a room not that dissimilar to what we have here. So how do we take advantage of it? Now, in Queensland, it can be quite challenging to get a rainy day on most days. Okay, it doesn't rain very often. It's winter apparently at the moment, and I got sunburnt last week. I'm not sure how that happens in winter, but maybe it's my Scottish skin. But taking advantage of different aspects of the weather on a training day. So you could walk into your room like this, and it's raining, or there's some other inclement weather that gives you the ability to go, actually, the scenario we're doing today, why don't we incorporate that with a bit of external weather? Why don't we add a bit of complexity in that space and take advantage of it in that direction? Surrounds. Okay, so that initial photo there, we've got basic paramedics that responded, they're first on scene, simple scenario. But what happens when you add copious amounts of people? You add an aggressor, or you add something else that changes surrounds. One aspect of pre-hospital care that's completely different from the in-hospital environment is the clear fact that nothing about our workplace is straightforward. It is a complete and utterly uncontrolled workplace. No matter how secure, no matter how straightforward or support that you have in place with you, our workplace is the most uncontrolled workplace that you could possibly get in a medical situation. No situation you have gone to in your years of working as paramedics would be the same, even if it was the same job or same job type. So sounds. Okay, so working on a sound capacity, how can sounds be annoying? How annoying can sounds be? Okay? It can completely distract you from what you're doing. You're not able to focus on what you're doing. Is there anything I'm going to shut the child up? How do we make a child that's crying? How do we make a child that's crying stop? What do we need to do? Okay, add a crying child to this scenario. What would be one thing we would do, or get a paramedic to do, to make that child go quiet?
Pick it up.
So I want to pick up the child.
Pick it up.
It's annoying, isn't it? Okay, but it's a simple thing. We pick the child up, we're comforting it. Okay, we're making it feel better. And sorry, I had to do that. My bad. So we pick the child up and we comfort it. It's not that difficult, but how distracting was that? Listening to me present up here with a screaming child in the background. So little simple things like that. Now that mannequin that I brought in here is just a standard Layardell Resusci infant mannequin. Nothing fancy about it. You can pump some air into it. You can do some two-fingered CPR just to practice that aspect. And all I did was pull out the central chest rise and fall section of the child, stick in a little JBL speaker that runs off Bluetooth. Bada boom, I've got myself a little environmental factored infant that we can sit in a pram in a corner of a room or something like that to add as an environmental distraction associated with that particular scenario. So, and that comes back to the sound. So that's an example of life cast mannequins which are based over in the UK. And just up there, they've got a little Bluetooth speaker inside the child's head. Okay, so coming back to cost, high fidelity and medium fidelity mannequins are quite expensive. But if you've got something already in your workplace that maybe the mannequin's broken, and I've got an example of that later on, you can take advantage of those other mannequins to actually incorporate some of these factors as part of your simulation process. So don't think the old broken sitting in the corner doesn't work anymore mannequin is useless. There's aspects where you can actually use them as a dirty mannequin, or as, like we just had before there, as a crying child mannequin. They're still of use to your organisation, so you can reinvest money that you've already spent back into education and technology at a very simplistic level. So instead of going out and spending another $3,000 on a new bit of equipment, you could spend $30 or $40 on a new Bluetooth speaker, for example, and throw it in there. Or you could put some weight inside that mannequin to make it weigh more and use it as an external outside extrication device, where the learning objectives of that would be working together as a crew. So, real people, simulated patients. How many people in this room actually use simulated patients for educational purposes, be it for qualified paramedics or for student paramedics? Put your hands up. So about a quarter of the room. Now, for those that do it quite regularly, the impact of simulated patients on your student, or your, be it a qualified student or be it a new graduate student, the impact a real person has on their approach to patient care is absolutely astronomical. So I'll use an example of one of the students that's graduated. He was a very quiet student. He was our oldest student. He was 52. And his connection with the particular topic we were working on, we were a bit concerned. We added a simulated patient to this particular scenario, and he was the best student by far over everyone in that cohort. So he went from quite reserved to being able to communicate with this patient, to be able to actually relate to what that patient was saying. And we understood that when we spoke to him later on, he says, I just can't relate to a plastic mannequin. I just can't relate to those fake situations. But when I'm with a real person, I can open up, I can understand what they're listening, what they're trying to tell me, I can empathise, and I can get into the heart of the problem because I'm actually dealing with a real person. It's irrelevant that everything they're saying is made up. I can actually relate and apply my foundational knowledge and skills to actually treat a real person. And in certain environments and scenarios and situations that I teach in, I will not assess them unless I have a real simulated patient. And a great example of that has been older adults and mental health patients. Okay? So unless you've got hundreds of thousands of dollars and you make the mannequin chase people around the room, good luck having a simulated patient that's a mannequin in a mental health or acute behavioural disturbance kind of situation. Where with a real person, it provides that sense of realism and an approach where they actually have to go through with it. So time management. Now, for those that came to IRCP over in Las Vegas, I did a presentation on interprofessional learning in simulation. And that's where our paramedical students worked with medical students, so future doctors, and they worked in a scenario where we completed the pre-hospital care aspect of the scenario, then we handed over to the medical students, and then there were other people within the health group, such as our allied sciences, nursing students, and people in that direction that continued on with that scenario for a week. But a key part of that scenario was an aspect that we do every day as paramedics and don't really consider much about it in relation to training. And that's EPCR, or your electronic patient care reporting, or patient care records, whatever your terminology might be. Now, for those paramedics that are still operational within this room, what would you say your average write-up time would be when you get to the hospital before someone starts harassing you, be it the communication centre, the nurse, the doctor? What would be about 25, 30 minutes? Be an average. I see some nods around the room. So what we do with this is when the students have completed the pre-hospital care management of this patient, they have to write up the actual scenario, or what they've done in treatment, management, the works, in an actual live industry EPCR. Now we use MediView, which is from Beyond Lucid Technologies over in the States. And they write that up and they're given a time limit. And if they don't meet that time limit, people come and start knocking on the door. They come on, hurry up, we need that EPCR. Why haven't you finished yet? And it gets them used to being able to complete these in a timely manner. Now we do provide some training and assistance for them how to use it before we throw them into these kind of scenarios. But we get them into the habit of being able to complete these concisely and quickly to provide what they need. And it's a legal document, and we reinforce that. And other aspects that we incorporate into our program as well is within written assessments as well. So we'll do case-based learning scenarios which are integrated blended learning videos and things online, and they'll have to complete the EPCR as part of their clinical assessment. And it provides up to a 40% assessment mark in the overall mark of that assessment, because it plays a major chunk. Between driving and writing reports, they're probably the two biggest things that we do as paramedics. Our actual clinical interventions and time with patient is actually probably only about 10% of what we do with our patient each time we meet them. Now, we can't simulate the driving aspect at our university, so that'll be left to the organisation when they go. But we can provide some assistance in their clinical documentation. Okay, so incorporating some of these factors into our simulation. So, one aspect that we look, and I'm sure every organisation's got a different approach to this, but my application to this over the years has been, why are we here today? What are we trying to achieve? What are the benefits to the students? What are the benefits to the paramedics? What are our benefits to new, updating current practices? And what's the best way to deliver this in that section? Troubleshooting. I've spent years working in the electronic space, and I've got to say, no matter how best laid your plans are in implementing something that's electronic or something that's associated with a computer, I did expect the baby not to start crying today. But something always goes wrong. It's just part of modern technology. You can't have electronics without something going wrong. So you need a good foolproof plan in place to ensure that you can work around that should something happen, particularly if it's an assessment part. And one thing that we encountered was we started using the Layardell ALS SimMed. They were the mannequins we incorporated into our program when we built it back in 2016. Now, the aspect with them, for those that haven't used them before, is the old mannequins used to have the studs where you connect your cables on, you push your defib, and away you would go. These new mannequins, the studs were removed, and they used a technology called SimLink, which were real pads that you would put over the same spot, and it would communicate via Bluetooth, and that's how you would actually deliver your shock. However, because of our university's intense wireless network and other technologies that were floating around, we had constant disconnection and other things like that before we were able to work a good workaround. So when we did exams with these, there's actually a remote control as well as an app on your phone. So if there was any disconnection, and we did have some disconnections in some of these assessments, we had a workaround so that we could immediately override the Wi-Fi and talk directly to the SimLink device so the students could continue on with their simulation with minimal disruption. And if you ask the students that had a disruption, most of them didn't even identify there was one because the troubleshooting and action plan was put in place so well that it was able to seamlessly move across throughout the scenario. And the other things we need to look at is your team or team's environment, location, appropriate notification. How many people have done a scenario in a public place and then missed notifying a key aspect of your surrounds and you end up with police, fire, security, and heaven knows what else turning up on the scene, very angry. Who's had that before? Yeah? It's interesting, isn't it? We've had a couple of hanging scenarios where police have rocked up, lights and sirens, and ambulances have come as well, because Jobo Public has seen ex-mannequin, which we thought we hid and covered quite well for the protection of the general public. However, not so much. Okay, so it is important that you notify, you have your notification stuff set in place, because it can become quite embarrassing, especially if it's an assessment, because it just disrupts and throws the whole day out. And probably the most important part that I think focuses around simulation is your closing aspects, your debriefing, your reflection. If you're not going to incorporate that into your training aspect, don't bother doing the simulation, because you're really not going to get anything out of the actual simulation of the process you're putting forward, because if there's no chance for a debrief on what was good, what could be better, or reflection on what you've done, how are you assessing, or how are you trying to bring in the learning objectives or outcomes that you're trying to implement throughout that process? And I think that's probably one of the most important factors of any simulation, is how you put that in practice. So let's do a couple of just straightforward, simple scenarios that we have done over the years. Now, I just want to point out this little aspect right here. So for those of you used to using these type of mannequins, it's not connected to anything, okay? This mannequin is unconnected, it's not turned on, but we've got, I'll talk about that in a minute, but who knows what that is? We've got blood, what else we got? That's $10 worth of steak out of Coles, okay? So it's to simulate compound fracture. That's a bit of meat, all right? Throwing a bit of meat on there. The objective of this scenario was obviously 9-year-old reversed over by an SUV. Pretty common and horrible incident, I must admit. But the environmental factors here, because there's no sound associated with it, their car was still running, okay? There was a screaming baby in the background. The speaker was actually hidden underneath the stroller. And there was a significant hemorrhage, which we'll show you in a minute, okay? So the learning objectives and outcomes of this particular scenario were twofold. Initially, it was the initial treatment of the patient. So identify the dangers. We still had the car running. We had to get rid of the car, okay? We had to turn that off. Identify the catastrophic hemorrhage. If that wasn't solved, the patient was going to die. And then the third part, so there are our environmental factors, and then the third part was related to high acuity level response. So in Queensland, that's our critical care paramedics coming in and doing that high-end blood replacement, all of that kind of stuff. So that was a twofold scenario. So the students also agreed with the crowd, okay, so the surrounds. And somewhere in the background there, over there somewhere, I was in the background being a hindrance, being a very unhelpful father. But the real kicker was getting the students to identify this. So this is our mannequin, and can you see in here? So that's how we were simulating our bleed. Now, anyone bleeding that quickly, quite frankly, of a child of that size, is going to bleed out pretty quick. Okay, but the way we did that was just a simple little pool pump, and we just filled some water through it. And the moment a cat tourniquet was actually applied, it went over the actual hose and actually stopped it. Okay, so we needed that leg sorted out with a cat tourniquet. We were happy with just an Israeli bandage and other sort of clogging devices on the other leg because it wasn't as bad. But this is a mannequin that's not plugged in. Now we weren't after the sounds, we weren't after the ECG, we weren't after any of that. We were after the physical application of dealing with the immediate life threat. And then further on, there was another mannequin set up with all that stuff turned on. But simple. I mean, that mannequin you could say it's broken. Okay, the electronics don't work anymore. It doesn't mean it's not useful in other aspects of your simulation where you can throw environmental factors. In fact, when the mannequins aren't functioning and you're not worried about destroying your $100,000 electronic equipment, you can do some pretty cool stuff outside. Immersions, dirty, you can really contextualise what you're trying and have a lot of fun with it. Quite frankly, money is an aspect when it comes to you designing your simulations, but probably the other biggest aspect is just how creative you are. And I have a bit of an evil laugh when it comes to thinking of certain simulation styles and scenarios, because you can, if you're very creative, there's no real limit to what you can do in that space. So, who saw an article published about 2.5 months ago, it's for our overseas visitors in America and Canada, who saw an article about United Airlines putting a restriction on their assistance animals on flights? Who saw that article? Who had a bit of a giggle? I'm not sure why I need my assistant snake. I've never heard of an assistant miniature horse. And why you'd have a winged assistant animal that you would allow onto a plane in the first place, I'm really not sure. So that sort of made my morning. However, we decided there was a couple of aspects that we have done over the time. And going back to our older adult patients, we've got Eddie, our little Jack Russell, and yes, Eddie from Fraser, in case anyone's wondering. And this mannequin we've got on the table there is simulating a 90-year-old woman. I'm simulating a 90-year-old husband. I look very good for a 90-year-old, I must say. And the goal of this scenario was death, dying, and grief. So I've woken up in the morning. My wife's still asleep, so I think. And I'm going to go make her a cup of tea, come back, wake her up, etc., etc. I come back, she doesn't respond. I call the ambulance. I don't know what else to do. Ambulance crew rocks up, and they're greeted with my wife asleep in the bed, and our dog sitting on top of it. Dog refuses to move. I love dog food. He wouldn't move for anyone. It's great. Okay, so basically the crew comes in, they put on the pads, they identify the patient's dead. They then have to, or was passed away in his sleep, they then have to do that with the dog around. They weren't allowed to move the dog, and the dog wasn't going to move to save them even if they tried. Because the moment a couple of crews did pick him up and put him down, and he jumped back up on the stretcher. And he did that because he is a food motivated fat Russell, is what I refer to him. He's not Jack Russell, he's a fat Russell, because he's an overweight Jack Russell. So they had to then break that news to the patient's husband, which is me. Now, simplistic, cost me about 50 cents worth of dog food. The dog was more than happy to come to work with me. That mannequin is a dirty mannequin, i.e. it has no electronics in it, there's no airway in it, it's nothing. It's just a drag and drop mannequin. We borrowed the wig from medicine, threw a blanket over it, used the stretcher as a bed. Okay, simplistic. I'm sure all of you in this room would have that amount of equipment you could very quickly put together. And the impact for this was low cost, high impact. And pretty much everyone in that group that went through, the 42 students who went through that day, none had ever broken to a patient's spouse that their loved one of 60 plus years had died. Now, how do you teach that? How do you broach that? How did I learn? I listened to what others said, spoke to people, reflected and that type of stuff. So we used that as a way of educating on how they would approach that. Okay? So it's before the police got there. And it's a common thing that we do if we rock up to scenes and we pronounce someone dead. It's often before police or other services are there that take on their formal responsibility. But how do you break that news? So that scenario was all about managing the death and grieving, managing the animal, and breaking that kind of news to the patient. And a few of the students broke down because they found it quite challenging. But at the end of it, they were very appreciative of the way that it came through. And then we had the other scenario where he was the assistance dog, returned veteran. I can't go anywhere without the dog. I won't put the dog down. You are going to have to manage me holding the dog. Okay? And that was interesting. Eddie has never seen any of this equipment before, and every time they put something on me, he'd paw at it or try and pull it off with his mouth. And he did that without me prompting him. He was just a curious dog. We often refer to him as a suicidal dog because he eats anything and everything. I'm glad I have a wife as a vet because he has eaten Nurofen, Panadol, pretty much anything he can get his hands on. And yes, I keep that type of stuff secured. He unzips bags. So the Nurofen in particular, he actually unzipped my bag and got it out because there was other food in there that he thought he would eat. So yeah, Jack Russells, if you have one, you've got to give them a job, otherwise they get busy and create their own work. So that's all very well with our small dogs. But what do we do if you walk in and they've got a giant dog? This is Zeus, a Great Dane from Canada. Okay, so he played the role of an assistance dog. And they had to do cardiac arrest. Now, I'm sorry I couldn't get the photo of him over one of the students with about a kilo worth or litre worth of drool going down their shirt. Absolutely brilliant. But can you imagine, those of you that don't, who's got a bit of a phobia against big dogs when you walk into a scene? Stick your hands in the air. Yeah, they're a bit freaky, aren't they? Now, Zeus, he would be almost the height of this leopard. Okay, so he is a big boy. Students didn't see him. They walked into the room and then met with this horse. Okay, so a few of them freaked out. One of them refused to come in, but eventually we coached them and said, look, he's a gentle giant. And we just proceeded through the scenario with Zeus being the assistance dog, okay? And then he had enough at the end of the day. But just little simple things like that. Granted, all of this was done in a classroom, and we didn't have all of the rooms set up like a lounge room or other aspects like that, but it was more just adding in the physical dog. It's all very well running a scenario where you go, okay, so there's a dog in the house, so the little dog is barking at you. What do you do? We're physically getting them to actually manage the situation with a real event so that when they turn up to these situations, they're better prepared. They know what to do as opposed to walking in having one of those, oh my God, what do I do moments. And that's a key aspect of implementing simple things like that. Now, I know there's probably plenty of people in this room who've got dogs and cats that can do similar things like that. And somehow I don't think the organisation would have that much of an issue with you implementing simple things like that, as long as your animals ain't going to sort of maul or eat people, so to speak. So, this is London Hems. And back when I was looking at PhD topics to do, one of the areas I was looking at was virtual reality-based simulation. And one of my actual projects now, which we'll see shortly, is actually being implemented by Monash University, which is great to see your research being implemented somewhere else. It's a bit of a compliment. So, one thing that caught my eye with London Hems is how many people in this room run helicopter retrieval services or medical retrieval services around the room? Who's got a helicopter attached there yet? Quite a few of you. So it's an expensive business to run, is it not? So how do you train crews? How do you maintain certain aspects of training? So London Hems had this very interesting concept that they've implemented as a trial, which they've since kept going, where they took a broken mannequin, that's what they tested with it originally, and they put it in a standard situation that they would come across quite regularly. The whole purpose of that scenario was to get paramedics, air crew, and doctors to work together in a crew resource management way to actually extricate said patient, work together on whatever was wrong with that patient, and bring it back to the helicopter. The helicopter bit of taking off, flying and landing in the hospital was utterly irrelevant. It was all about getting that crew resource management put together. And they worked out the cost per scenario, if you took out the wages of the personnel, was about $110 a scenario. Now, I've got a bit of an aviation background, and I know a helicopter like that is anywhere between $5,500 to $6,500 an hour to fly. So that's pretty decent money in relation to crew resource management training and getting your crews work together. And the key thing about this was that they weren't worried about what the pilots needed to do to maintain their proficiency. They were getting a bit of transient confusion with new paramedic staff, new medical staff, and new aircrew staff working amongst each other. And they needed to come up with a simplistic way of actually applying a very cost-effective training solution so that any new members could work together and establish good crew resource management situations. Because there's nothing worse, and as a pilot myself, there's nothing worse than the two of you having completely different ideas when your aircraft is falling apart around you. Okay? And having experienced undercarriage failure before, and trying to manage that with two of us, was quite a challenging work environment. But what I found most alarming was the look of disappointment on the fire service, ambulance service, and police service when I successfully landed the aircraft. It was now we've got nothing to do. I mean, I was happy with the fact they had nothing to do, but they all seemed kind of disappointed. Okay, so Great Western Air Ambulance Charity. They have a very interesting thing. Now, I've learnt from our Saskatoon presentation that if we put music that's from someone else on here, they block the stream. So I've muted this, but this is their crew practicing with the sound, okay, of having to do an intubation in a very noisy environment. So these two are rocking out to Bon Jovi in noise cancelling earphones, and they're doing this activity completely without verbal communication. Okay? So very straightforward, but high impact, low cost, high impact. Simple environmental factors, and again, those of you that have helicopters in your service, a very simple technique that could be used to help develop this type of crew resource management training. Okay, still going. So yeah, it's a very, very simple and effective technique. There we go. All right. So immersive environments, that's our simulator, our ambulance simulator. So Is there anyone in this room that's got a university with an immersive room where all the walls turn on and the roof turns on? Yep, they're pretty awesome, aren't they? It completely changes the whole aspect of what you're doing. You can turn a standard room into a swimming pool or into a busy street or something like that, and they work really well. This is our immersive ambulance simulator, which Monash University has since copied and implemented with their program as well. And that simulator is a completely, fully functioning, working interior ambulance, right down to oxygen, electricity, the works. And the windows are actually large screen TVs which emulate movement. I don't have the hydraulics turned on at the moment, but without the hydraulics functioning, the illusion of movement is that real that students have got sick riding in it. Because as it accelerates, you see people bracing. As it decelerates, you see them bracing. They go up to do CPR and you see them grabbing something to try and stay straight. And it puts them inside an ambulance itself, but it's all very well we do certain aspects of our training and skill development in a classroom. What happens when you shrink the size of that classroom down and you use real dimensions and you throw in multiple factors to try and make it work? So our interprofessional pathway that I mentioned before, that comes back to our time management. So that's another way that we sort of throw the factors of time management, doctors, hospital environments, all that aspect as well. And that's what I spoke more about in 2017 in IRCP in Las Vegas, and that one's online at IRCP if you want to have a look at that. And again, that's our time management space as well. So agency collaboration. Dr. Ashford, who is the Medical Director of Queensland Ambulance Service, very impressed with the way the simulator actually works and looking at implementing collaboration with our simulator with their high acuity and critical care level paramedics to change the way in which they approach their work. And over there on the right, or left, sorry, we've got collaboration with the fire service in their state training facility as well. Just to create, because our university gets a little bit upset when we start cutting up cars in the car park. Apparently it's not a good picture to have. And we've been fighting for a while to try and have some bent cars in secluded areas, but as look, it's not a good image to have bent and twisted cars in our university. We like our clean, pristine buildings. And when we try to put them inside a big workshop or a big shed or something like that, oh no, we don't have the space. So that costs us about $800 an hour to have a fire crew, safety officers, and a few other minor things associated with it, so that our students can go and spend 8 hours worth of training on real cars and other things like that. So cost-benefit analysis from a manager's perspective, I think it would be better if we had our own internally located. So that's pretty much on my aspects of simulation. It's sort of where I'm going to finish my IRCP journey talking about simulation over the past 4 years. Next year, I'm going to be focusing more on my PhD research. And that's to do with international ambulance models and the comparison between developed and developing countries. So one of the areas I am looking at is community paramedicine in developing countries. And at the moment, I'm working in Mongolia and the Maldives with support from countries in the UK, US, Canada, and Australia on how that actually works. So it's a very exciting project. I have no shortage of people that wish to be research assistants in either the Maldives or Mongolia. Can't understand why there seems to be more for the Maldives than Mongolia. But it is interesting to see how they actually apply their ambulance service within their country's needs. And having participated a few times in some of these areas, someone that grew up in a very developed country like Australia, it certainly made my eyes almost pop out of my head with a few things that you came across and saw, just when it just came down to basic equipment that we take for granted, and how they contextualise what they have to facilitate what they need. So that's my contact details. If you would like to get in touch, and I'm happy to take any questions if there's time. I think I went a bit too long, Gary.
Yeah, we'll catch the questions.
No worries.
All right, our next presentation is from Ross Sofield, the TIPSIM Mobile Simulation Initiative.
realised that we're now running a bit behind it just before lunch. So, my name's Ross Salati, as Gary said. I'm a critical care paramedic from Victoria in Australia, and I have been for the last 5 or 6 years in a clinical support role. Just actually changed roles to a new community-based role, but we'll talk more about that. For those of you, we've done it already yesterday, but for those of you who don't know, who aren't from this part of the world, Victoria is the bottom southeastern corner of mainland Australia, and I'm from a place called Gippsland, which remarkably on this map, Terrell makes a mention. Ben, you go down to Geelong. Geelong's good on it, but Terrell's not that big, but it does rate a mention. So southeastern corner of mainland Australia, and then Gippsland itself is a terrible part of the world to live and work in. Got snowfields, rolling green hills, penguins, more hills, big industry, lots of wind, Wilson's Prom, and for all people from Victoria, we like coffee. So it's a tough job down in Gippsland, but it does bring with it its challenges because of geography. So this is the state of Victoria and the green bit. So we're the most southeastern bit of the southeastern bit of Australia, excluding Tasmania, who floated away a few years ago. There's no Tasmanians here to offend us there.
They're sitting right here.
So Tasmania is more southeastern than us.
Way better. Way better.
That's right.
Technically, way colder.
away from us.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
many,
we got
many
rid
years
of
ago, I
it.
think we were actually connected. So if you go to Mount Cooper, it looks a lot like Tasmania. Anyway, so where I work in rural Victoria, we have some geographical issues. You can see it's quite a long area to drive from one end to the other. Is about 9 hours, and spread across that is a large stretch of population through a strip here called Warragul and Latrobe Valley, and then as we get more further east, we get more remote, and our response model changes as we get there to volunteer-based, etc. So there are some challenges with maintaining skills in our workforce. So I guess why we're all here, about patients at the end of the day. Everyone in our industry is in the industry because they want to improve people's health outcomes and deliver good patient care, whether that's at a critical care level or a community level. Everyone is all here about patients and safety. And in Victoria, off the back of the Targeting Zero report a couple of years ago now, there's been a renewed focus or a big push into making sure we improve patient safety across the whole health sector, and that included the formation of Safety Care Victoria and a set of driving principles that all health agencies are embedding to try and make sure we improve our patients' health outcomes. And we've certainly done that ourselves in Airports Victoria. There's been a lot of work gone into trying to improve that, and the Gibson project's one of them. So this is it's a bit blurry, I apologise for the quality of the photo. This is the drug bag I used 15 years ago when I first started as a community officer in rural Victoria. It was pretty blank and empty, and this is the one that intensive care or critical care paramedic carries today. So the job evolves over time, and it's evolved rapidly over time and increased in its complexity, and with that increases the challenges in maintaining our skills and training. If we looked around, when I started as the clinical support officer a couple of years ago, or a few years ago now, access to training was a big issue for us across Gippsland, and it was very dependent on who had the most access to money. So we had a branch that had a good community auxiliary who fundraised. They'd have the state-of-the-art fancy mannequin that had all the simulation features Duncan was just speaking of. If I went down the road, they had a cardboard box for a little bit of role playing, or this one branch got quite creative with some PVC pipe to make themselves a bike trainer. But it was very hit and miss, and it depended where you worked, what access to training you had. And importantly though, the people that had all the fancy equipment, it was in cupboard gathering dust and not getting used. So even if you have all the fancy equipment, you still need to have a structured way to make sure you use it, and to make sure that there's impetus for people to use it. So having all the gear is not necessarily the answer. And to put all the gears, we made a list of the equipment that we thought would be ideal to have in a functional career paramedic branch. So Gippsland has over 300 staff, some 26 career branches. So to put a full-size adult mannequin, it's about $13,000. A simulated monitor, we use the iSim, but any brand, you're looking at around $10,000. So to do that across every branch, to make sure everyone had the same equipment, it's about a $600,000 investment, and that's just not sustainable for something that's going to sit in the cupboard and gather dust. So that at a similar time, Monash University had just launched their postgraduate sim centre that Duncan made reference to before. Quite a few of our clinical staff work for Monash as well, and I've used that facility and it's fantastic. And in a place that's geographically centralised, it makes sense to have an isolated simulation centre, but when you look at a geographical spread like we've got in Gippsland, putting a static centre somewhere, even if we put it right in the middle, staff was still going to have to drive 3, 4 or 5 hours to come and use it. So we're trying to be creative and come up with a way to make sure we have fair access to training across the region. So discussed some of the challenges already, but basically the skill sets evolved over time. We have a lot more high risk, low frequency procedures now across our workforce, particularly things like drug assisted intubation, surgical airway and chest decompression, but also we've just moved right across our rural workforce to ensure that we've got pre-hospital 12-lead ECG and thrombolysis for STEMI. So there's a number of skills that staff need to be practiced in that they don't get a lot of exposure to, and the more remote and the more rural you go, the less exposure you have to them, but the more important it is that when you have to do them, you get them right, because there's no one there to help you. So we had a clear challenge to make sure we provided people the training they needed around these high-risk, low-frequency skills. And the other challenge was to get staff engaged. As I said, we had some branches that had all this great equipment and never used it. So how do we get people on board and get them to want to practice their skills and training? And how do we deliver that across the region? So scratched our heads for a little while, and myself and a colleague, Ben Meadley, who some of you would know, came up with the idea of putting together some gear that we had access to and doing a bit of a travelling roadshow. So we were able to borrow a nice simulate monitor from the air ambulance crew at Terrelton who had one, pinched a mannequin from a storeroom that wasn't being used, put it in the back of a ute and went for a drive around the region and advertised to all the branches that we were coming on certain days. And you'll notice in these photos there's quite a few people who aren't in uniform because they came in on their day off. Some of them drove for 2 hours to come to participate in the training because they wanted to do it. So the fact that someone was bringing training equipment to them and they were going to get structured simulation training was something they were really excited about. And we had great representation across the whole of Gippsland. So it was a 4 days, 6 days worth of travelling around to deliver some training across the region. And the feedback was overwhelming from staff that they thoroughly enjoyed it. Happy to come in again. Thank you for coming down here. It's hard to get our team inspired, etc. So basically it was a test of the water to see if it would work. Looking at literature, we know simulation works across other industry. In clinical, obstetrics do it exceptionally well in Australia with programs like PROMPT, where they come out around the regions and do simulation training. So we know there's evidence there that it works, and within our own ambulance service or paramedic service, we already use it in our aviation sector. So our ambulance paramedics, here's a picture of one of them who's doing their paediatric drug assisted intubation reaccreditation and some winching currencies. So we knew that simulation worked, the evidence supports it, and it works already in our industry, but we didn't do it reliably for our on-road staff who make up the bulk of our workforce. So our aim was to, I've changed all the terms for Gary, so to provide our paramedic workforce basically, and our volunteers for that matter, across the Gippsland region with guaranteed and equitable access to relevant and appropriate training equipment. So not a piece of PVC pipe and a cardboard box, but stuff that was going to simulate what they used. So the idea we come up with was to, instead of having a static sim centre, let's make it mobile. So if we can't bring Mohammed to the mountain, so to speak, we'll take the mountain to Mohammed. So we got a retired ambulance vehicle, put a mannequin in it, added a simulator, some response equipment to make it look like an ambulance. Importantly, the ability to video record for feedback, which has been exceptional, and develop a database tool to track our skills exposure. And that comes to about 60 grand, which is a lot cheaper than 600. With that, had to go and find some money, and we're very fortunate to have a network of ambulance auxiliaries in Victoria, community people that fundraise, and although they're not here, I need to acknowledge that Ellie Way Auxiliary who outright gave me $67 for the project, and on the same day forked over another 60 for an ultrasound management for the Evan guys. So there's 120,000 thanks for coming. So that was easy. There was a bit of other work I had to do, which added to my grey hair collection, and Gippsland was born. So it is an ambulance simulation vehicle that looks like an ambulance because it is an ambulance, and in it is a mannequin, full set of gear that you would find in an all ambulance, only formally the simulator that makes it all look real. It's a very short video, hopefully it works.
Introducing GIPSIM, an innovative, accessible and exciting clinical education initiative for the Gippsland region. Generously supported by the Halimet One Auxiliary, GIPSIM is a high-fidelity simulation environment that reproduces the challenges of paramedic practice in a safe and controlled setting. Realistic, fully fitted and mobile, GIPSIM offers all levels of paramedic practice the opportunity to advance their skills, review procedures, or undertake reaccreditation in a workable and familiar environment, anywhere, anytime.
So the GIPSIM vehicle is available to all paramedic and micro-paramedic teams, as well as the first responders across Gippsland. And predominantly it'll be clinical support officers, team managers, paramedic educators, and ACO team leaders who all can engage the vehicle to come to their branch or their region. But it's there for anyone to have a go at, and that's the key message we want. It's out there, we want it to be used.
GIPSIM offers paramedics an opportunity to explore their abilities in a non-clinical setting, from the basic through to the advanced.
GIPSIM is here to help paramedics improve their care in that space of high-risk skills where there is a high frequency and a low exposure to the skills.
GIPSIM, mobile, state-of-the-art simulation and clinical education for the Gippsland region. Contact your local CSO for further information.
So that's a big thing. So it was launched in November last year, and since that time it's got around the region. We estimate 50% of our workforce across Gippsland has had exposure to it now. And before we launched it though, like anything, you have to measure it. So we did some pre-deployment evaluation about staff's attitudes and feelings towards it, how often they do simulation exposure or simulation training, and what their attitudes towards the GIPSIM truck was, which was pretty good representation. We had about 30% return of staff, which isn't huge numbers, but for Gippsland is significant. The bulk of the responders we got were matches the demographic of our workforce. We have a large workforce now, or a young workforce now coming through. But good 50-50 representation of gender and across the districts of Gippsland, so pretty representative of what we've got. And the bulk of them being our qualified paramedics and intensive care paramedics, or using the right lingo, ACP and CCP staff. Mix of ages is fine. Some surprising exposure to some of our complex case types in real actual skills. So more so than what we expected, but probably representative of the people who responded to the survey. And likewise, the response to what people had actually practiced in a branch environment, if accurate, is encouraging. But certainly the general numbers around how often they do simulation exposure suggested that it wasn't that frequent for most of them. And the attitudes towards simulation was overwhelmingly positive. So probably hard to read, but the big blue lines the positive responses, basically saying they feel it will enhance their clinical practice, they're looking forward to it, and they're hoping that it improves their skills and confidence. That's it at work, basically, travelling around the region, being used for simulation. It can be done obviously in the ambulance vehicle that you can set up the top, or you can pull your gear out of it like you would in a normal scenario. And certainly, there's some ideas from Duncan's presentation we can embed into it to try and make things a little bit more realistic, but certainly once you get them into the back of the ambulance, it's very much like being in an ambulance. We've actually run some simulations where we then, got the crews to, drive clinics to the hospital while they're managing the ventilated patient in the back. Keeping track of skills is important, so we've developed a database tool. We'd like to have a better one, but basically it keeps track of skills exposure, and it has the ability to, we've set time frames on our high risk, low frequency skills like drug assisted intubation to say if you haven't done one for 6 months, you become uncurrent or non-current. And we can run a report from that so we know who to target and where we need to send the vehicle. The idea being that we can move towards a mandatory skills credentialing for our high-risk skills like airway management. There's still more work to go, so we'll do more evaluation. We've got a second survey that we've just got back last week that's got off the press as a 6-month evaluation of how it's going, and there's still some areas to work on. But basically, at the end of that, we'll write up a paper on the attitudes towards it and make a recommendation. There's other regions around Victoria, they're keen to replicate it in their regions, and it's certainly shows that it can work. So the 6-month progress survey, again, is about of the 50% of people that we estimate the vehicle's been to, we had a 15% return from them. So it's still not huge numbers, but basically, again, fairly good spread of demographic across the workforce. Encouragingly, the access to simulation exposure has gone up to over 50% at least twice a month. So probably because the vehicle's been visiting their branch, but that's okay. The other one is important, their simulated skills exposure has gone up exponentially as well, so which shows that it's working and it's been a valuable tool. The feedback again from staff has been mostly positive. It's an awesome resource, we're lucky to have it. It provided us the opportunity to structure a scenario. As an educator, I still feel we can increase the understanding of it. And then you can't make everyone happy all the time. I did not see the point of Gibson, which is who he is. We're going to have a chat because I suggest they're probably one of the people that needs to use it the most, but that's okay. It does tell us that we need to do some more education around it. And there are some barriers in it. It doesn't have a mechanical ventilator, only because of it's cost prohibitive with the one unit. So we have to borrow one when we do. So there's some things we can add to it to make it better, but certainly never make it rapid build at times. The biggest challenge for us has actually been physically moving the vehicle across the region. So it's a big area, and to get the vehicle to East Gippsland, unless someone takes it up there, has been a challenge for us. And it's not staffed. We haven't got a funded EFT to staff the vehicle to drive it around. So that's, if you're designing one, look at the ways to overcome that. But certainly we've been able to use, where we had the most success with it, we've had access to a couple of female paramedics who are on safe duties for pregnancy reasons. So we had them for 4 months of safe duties for them, and they had, so between the two of them, we were running 7 days a week for about 4 months across the region, and they were knocking people away with a stick because they couldn't keep up with the demand for it. So that's been fantastic. So they've gone to have their babies now, which is great for them, but detrimental to the project. So we're encouraging people to hurt themselves. But certainly that would be the one recommendation moving forward. And we've actually changed our model now so that we physically move the vehicle to a region for a month. So we'll go to East Gippsland for a month. The staff there can access it, and then we'll bring it back into within South Gippsland, etc., to try and increase the usability of it. But that's been the biggest barrier. And obviously we still have a little bit of work to do with some of the culture around skills maintenance and training and simulation, but that's probably not a surprise to anyone here. That's pretty much it. And I got it on 12 o'clock on the dot for you. No worries.
Okay, I made an unfortunate mistake in the schedule. I shorted your lunch, but as luck would have it, Pierre Poirier could not join us. So we're going to take the full hour for lunch, and then we're going to back up the first speaker to 1 o'clock, and we'll drop Pierre out, and we'll be right back on schedule. So we'll see you at 1 o'clock.
I'm actually going to take the phone out of the room for lunchtime. I'll restart it.